Roald Dahl, The Witches, read by Hosea Tong Ho. A note about witches. In fairy tales, witches always wear silly black hats and black cloaks, and they ride in broomsticks. But this is not a fairy tale. This is about real witches. The most important thing you should know about real witches is this. Listen very carefully. Never forget what is coming next. Real witches dress in ordinary clothes and look very much like ordinary women. They live in ordinary houses and they work in ordinary jobs. That is why they are so hard to catch. A real witch hates children with a red hot sizzling hatred that is more sizzling and red hot than any other hatred you could possibly imagine. A real witch spends all her time plotting to get rid of the children in a particular territory. Her passion is to do away with them one by one. It's all she thinks about the whole day long. Even if she is working as a cashier in a supermarket, or typing letters for a businessman, or driving around in a fancy car, her mind will always be plotting and scheming and churning and burning and whizzing and fizzing with murderous, bloodthirsty thoughts. Which child should I slay first? Exactly which child should I choose for my next squelching? A real witch gets the same pleasure from squelching a child as you get from eating a plateful of strawberries and thick cream. She reckons on doing away with one child a week. Anything less than that, she becomes grumpy. One child a week is 52 a year. Squish them and squiggle them and make them disappear. That is the motto of all witches. Very carefully, a victim is chosen. Then the witch stalks the child like a hunter stalking a little bird in the forest. She treads softly. She moves quietly. She gets closer and closer. Then at last, when everything is ready, psst, she swoops. Sparks flame, flames leap, oil boils, rats howl, skin shrivels, and the child disappears. A witch, you must understand, does not knock children on the head, or stick knives into them, or shoot them with a pistol. People who do those things get caught by the police, and witches never get caught. Don't forget that she has a magic in her fingers and devilry dancing in her blood. She can make stones jump from about like frogs, and she can make tongues of flame go flickering across the surface of the water. These magic powers are very frightening. Luckily, they are not in great number of real witches today, but they are still quite enough to make you nervous. In England, there are probably about 100 of them altogether. Some countries have more, others not quite as many. No country in the world is completely free from witches. A witch is always a woman. I do not wish to speak badly about women. Most women are lovely. The fact remains that all witches are women. There is no such thing as a male witch. On the other hand, a ghoul is always a male. So indeed is a barghest. Both are dangerous, but neither of them is half as dangerous as a real witch. As far as children are concerned, a real witch is easily the most dangerous of all living creatures on earth. What makes her doubly dangerous is the fact that she doesn't look dangerous. Even when you know all the secrets, you will hear about those in a minute. You can still never be quite sure whether it is a witch you are gazing at or just a kind lady. If a tiger were to make himself look like a large dog with a waggy tail, you'll probably go up to him and pat him on the head, and that would be the end of you. It is the same with witches. They all look nice ladies. Kindly examine the picture below. Which lady is the witch? That is a difficult question, but is one that every child must try to answer. For all you know, a witch may be living next door to you right now, or she might be the woman with the bright eyes who sat opposite you on the bus this morning. She might be the old lady with the dazzling smile who offered you a sweet from a white paper bag in the street from before lunch. She might even, and this will make you jump, she might even be your lovely school teacher who's reading these words to you at the very moment. Look carefully at the teacher. Perhaps she is smiling at you absurdly of such a suggestion. Don't let that put you off. It could be the part of her cleverness. I am not, of course, telling you for one that your teacher is actually a witch. All I am saying is that she might be one. It is most likely. But, and here comes the big but, it's not impossible. Oh, if only there were a way of telling for sure whether a woman was a witch or not. Then we could round them all up and put them in a meat grinder. Unhappily, there is no such way. But there are a number of little signals that you can look out for, little quirky habits that all witches have in common. And if you know about these, if you remember them always, then you just might possibly manage to escape from being squelched before you are very much older. I, myself, had 2 separate encounters with witches. Before I was 8 years old, from the first I escaped unharmed, but on the second occasion, I was not so lucky. Things happened to me that will probably make you scream when you read about them. That can't be helped. The truth must be told. The fact is that I am still here and able to speak to you. However peculiar I may look, is due entirely to my wonderful grandmother. My grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians knew all about witches, for Norway, with its black forests and icy mountains, is where the first witches came from. My father and mother had lived there and had started to go to English school. Twice a year, at Christmas, in the summer, we went back to Norway to visit my grandmother. This old lady, as far as I could have gathered, was just about the only surviving relative I had on either side of our family. She was my mother's mother, and I absolutely adored her. When she and I were together, we spoke in either Norwegian or in English. It didn't matter which. We were equally fluent in both. I have to admit that I felt closer to her than my mother. Soon after my 7th birthday, my parents took me, as usual, to Christmas with my grandmother in Norway. And it was over there while my father and mother and I were driving in an icy weather just north of Oslo. The car skidded off the road and went tumbling down a rocky ravine. My parents were killed. I was firmly strapped into the back of the seat and received only a cut on my forehead. I won't go into the horrors of the terrible afternoon. I still get shivers when I think about it. I finished up, of course, but in my grandmother's house, with her arms around me tight, and both of us crying the whole night long. "What are we going to do now?" I asked her through my tears. "You will stay here with me," she said, "and I will look after you." "Aren't I going back to England?" "No," she said, "I could never do that. Heaven shall take my soul, but Norway shall keep my bones." The very next day, in order that we might both try to forget our great sadness, my grandmother started telling me stories. She was a wonderful storyteller, and I was enthralled by her that she told me. But I didn't become really excited until she got on to the subject of witches. She was apparently a great expert on those creatures, and she made it very clear to me that her witch stories, unlike most of the others, were not imaginary tales. They were all true. They were the gospel truth. They were history. Everything she was telling me about witches had actually happened, and I had better believe it. What was worse, was far, far worse, was that witches were still with us. They were all around us, and I had better believe that too. "Are you really being truthful, Grandmama? Really and truly truthful?" "My darling," she said, "you won't last long in this world if you don't know how to spot a witch when you see one." "But you told me that witches look like ordinary women, Grandmama. So how can I spot them?" "You must listen to me," my grandmama said. "You must remember everything I tell you. After that, all you can do is cross your heart and pray to heaven and hope for the best." We were in the big living room of her house in Oslo, and I was ready for bed. The curtains were never drawn in that house, and through the windows I could see huge snowflakes falling slowly onto an outside world that was as black as tar. My grandmother was tremendously old and wrinkled, with a massive wide body which she had smothered in grey lace. She sat there majestic in her armchair, filling every inch of it. Not even a mouse could have squeezed in to sit beside her. I myself, just 7 years old, was crouched on the floor at her feet, wearing pajamas, dressing gown and slippers. "You swear you aren't pulling my leg?" I kept saying to her. "You swear you aren't pretending?" "Listen," she said, "I have no less than 5 children who have simply vanished off the face of earth, never to be seen again. The witches took them." "I still think you're trying to frighten me," I said. "I'm trying to make sure you don't go the same way," she said. "I love you, and I want you to stay with me." "Tell me about the children who have disappeared," I said. My grandmother was the only grandmother I ever met who smoked cigars. She lit one now, a long black cigar that smelled of burning rubber. "The first child I knew who disappeared," she said, "was called Ragnhild Hansen. Ragnhild was 8 at the time, and she was playing with her little sister on the lawn. The mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of air. "Where's Ragnhild?" she asked. "She went outside with the tall lady," she said, and she walked away with her. "What tall lady?" the mother said. "The tall lady in white gloves," the little sister said. She told Ragnhild by hand and led her away. "No one," my grandma said, "ever saw Ragnhild ever again." "Didn't they search for her?" I asked. "They searched for miles around. Everyone in town helped, but they never found her." "What happened to the other 4 children?" I asked. "They vanished just as Ragnhild did." "How, Grandmama? How did they vanish?" "In every case, a strange lady was seen outside the house just before it happened." "But how did they vanish?" I asked. "The second one was very peculiar," my grandmother said. "There was a family called Christensen. They lived up in Holmenkollen, and they had an old oil painting in Holmenkollen, and that's a very old painting in the living room, which they were very proud of. The painting showed some ducks in the yard outside a farmhouse. There were no people in the painting, just a flock of ducks on the grassy farmyard and the farmhouse in the background. It was a large painting and rather pretty. Well, one day, their daughter, Solveig, came home from school eating an apple. She said a nice lady had given it to her on the street. The next morning, little Solveig was not in her bed. The parents searched everywhere, but they couldn't find her. Then all of a sudden, her father shouted, "There she is!" All of a sudden, "There she is! That's Solveig feeding the ducks." He was pointing in the oil painting, and sure enough, Solveig was in it. She was painting in the farmyard in the act of throwing bread to the ducks with a basket. The father rushed up to the painting and touched her, but that didn't help. She was simply a part of the painting, just a picture painted on the canvas. "Did you ever see that painting, Grandmama, with that little girl in it?" "Many times," my grandmama said. "And the peculiar thing was that the little Solveig kept changing her position in the picture. One day she would actually be inside the farmhouse, and you could see her face looking over the window. Another day she would be far over to the left with a duck in her arms." "Did you see her moving?" Grandmama said. Nobody did. Wherever she was, whether outside feeding the ducks or inside looking out of the window, she was always motionless, just a figure painted in oils. It was all very odd, my grandmama said. Very odd indeed. And what was odd out of everything was that when years went by, she kept growing older in the picture. In 10 years, the small girl had become a young woman. In 30 years, she was middle-aged. And all at once, 54 years after it had happened, she disappeared from the picture altogether. "You mean she died?" I said. "Who knows?" my grandmama said. "Some very mysterious things go on in this world of witches." "That's 2 you've told me about," I said. "What happened to the third one?" "The third one was Birgit Svensson," my grandmama said. "She lived just across the road from us. One day, she started growing feathers all over her body. Within a month, she had turned into a large white chicken. Our parents kept her for years in a pen in the garden. She even laid eggs." "What color eggs?" "Brown ones," Grandma said. "Biggest eggs I've ever seen in my life. My mother made omelets out of them. Delicious they were." I gazed up upon my grandma, who sat there like some ancient queen on her throne. Her eyes were misty grey, and they seemed to be looking at something many miles away. The cigar was the only real thing about her at the moment, and the smoke it made billowed round her head in a blue cloud. "But the little girl who had become a chicken didn't disappear," I said. "No, not Birgit. She lived on for many years, laying her brown eggs." "You said all of them disappeared?" "I made a mistake," my grandma said. "I am getting old. I can't remember everything." "What happened to the 4th child?" I asked. "The 4th was a boy called Harold," my grandmama said. "One morning, his skin went all greyish yellow. Then it became hard and crackly like the shell of a nut. By evening, the boy turned to stone." I said, "You mean real stone, granite?" She said, "I'll take you to see him if you like. They're still keeping him in the house. He stands in a hall, a little stone statue. Visitors lean their umbrellas up against him." Although I was very young, I was not prepared to believe everything my grandma told me. And yet she spoke with such conviction, with such utter seriousness, with never a smile on her face or a twinkle in her eye, that I found myself beginning to wonder. "Go on, Grandma," I said. "You told me that there were 5 altogether. What happened to the last one?" Would you like to puff my cigar?" she said. "I'm only 7, Grandmama." "I don't care what age you are," she said. "You'll never catch a cold if you smoke cigars." "What about number 5, Grandma?" "Number 5," she said, chewing the end of her cigar as though it was a delicious asparagus, was rather an interesting case. A 9-year-old boy could leave with summer holidaying with his family on the fjord, and the whole family was panicking and swimming off some rocks on one of those little islands. Young Leaf dived into the water, and his father, who was watching him, noticed that he stayed under for an unusually long time. When he came to the surface at last, he was not Leaf anymore. What was he? Grandmama said. He was a porpoise. He wasn't. He couldn't have been. He was a lovely young porpoise, she said, and as friendly as could be. Grandma, I said. Yes, my darling? Did he really and truly turn into a porpoise? Absolutely. I knew his mother well, and she told me about it. She told me about how Leaf the porpoise stayed with them all that afternoon, giving his brothers and sisters rides on his back. They had a wonderful time. Then he waved a flip at them and swam away, never to be seen again. But Grandma, I said, how did they know he was a porpoise? How did they know that porpoise was actually Leaf? He talked to them, Grandma said. He laughed and joked with them all the time. He was giving them rides. But wasn't there a most tremendous fuss when this happened? I asked. Not much, my Grandma said. You must remember that here in Norway we are used to this sort of thing. There are witches everywhere. There's probably one living in our street this very moment. It's time you went to bed. A witch couldn't come through my window in the night, would she? I asked, quaking a little. No, my Grandma said. A witch will never do such silly things like climbing up drain pipes or breaking into people's houses. You'll be quite safe in your bed. Come on along. I'll tuck you in. The next evening, after my grandmother had given me my bath, she took me once again into the living room for another story. Tonight, the old woman said, I am going to tell you how to recognize a witch and how to see one, and how to know when you see one. Can you always be sure? I asked. No, she said, you can't. And that's the trouble. But you can make a pretty good guess. She was dropping cigar ash all over her lap, and I hoped she wasn't going to catch on fire because she told me how to recognize a witch. In the first place, she said, a real witch is certain always going to be wearing gloves when you meet her. Surely not always, I said. What about in the summer when it's hot? Even in the summer, my grandma said. She has to. Do you want to know why? Why, I said. Because she does not have fingernails. Instead of fingernails, she has curvy claws like cats, and she'll wear the gloves to hide them. Mind you, lots of very respectable women wear gloves, especially in winter, so this doesn't help you very much. Mama used to wear gloves, I said. Not in the house, my grandma said. Witches wear their gloves in the house. They only take them off when they go to bed. How do you know all this, Grandmama? Don't interrupt, she said. Just take it all in. The second thing to remember is that real witches are always bold. Bold, I asked. Bold as a boiled egg, my grandma said. I was in shock. There's something indecent about a bold woman. Why are they bold, Grandmama? Don't ask me why, she snapped, but you can take it from me that not a single hair grows on a witch's head. How horrid. Disgusting, my grandmother said. If she's bold, she's easy to spot, I said. Not at all, Grandmama said. A real witch always wears a wig to hide her boldness. She wears a first-class wig, and it's almost impossible to tell a real wig from an ordinary hair, unless you give it a pull off to see if it comes off. Then that's what I'll have to do, I said. Don't be foolish, my grandma said. You can't go around pulling people's hair of every lady you meet, even if she is wearing gloves. Just you try it and see what happens. So that doesn't help much either, I said. None of these things are any good on its own, my grandma said. It's only when you put them all together that they begin to make a little sense. Mind you, my grandma went on, these wigs do cause a rather serious problem for witches. What problem, Grandma said. What problem, Grandmama? They make the scalp itch most terribly, she said. You see, when an actress wears a wig, or if you or I wear a wig, we will be putting it over our own hair, where a witch has to put it straight on her naked scalp, and underneath of a wig is always very rough and scratchy. It sets up a frightful itch on the bald skin. It causes nasty sores on the heads. Wig rash, the witches call it, and it doesn't half itch. What other things must I look for to recognize for a witch? Look for the nose holes, my grandma said. Witches have slightly larger nose holes than ordinary people. The rim of each nose is pink and curvy, like the rim of a certain kind of seashell. Why do they have such big nose holes? I asked. for smelling with, my grandma said. A real witch has the most amazing power of sense. She can actually smell out a child who's standing on the other side of the street on a pitch black night. She couldn't smell me, I said. I've just had a bath. Oh yes, she could, my grandma said. The cleaner you happen to be, the more smelly you are to a witch. That can't be true, I said. An absolutely clean child gives off the most ghastly stench to a witch. My grandma said, the dirtier you are, the less you smell. But that doesn't make sense, Grandma. Oh yes, it does. It isn't the dirt that the witch is smelling, it is you. The smell that drives a witch mad actually comes right out of your own skin. It comes oozing out of your skin in waves, and these waves, stink waves, the witches call them, go floating through the air and hit the witch right smack in her nostrils. They send her reeling. Now wait a minute, Grandma. Don't interrupt, she said. The point is this. When you haven't washed for a week and your skin is all covered with dirt, then quite obviously the stink waves cannot come oozing out nearly as strong. I shall never bath again, I said. Just don't have one too often, my grandma said. Once a month is quite enough for a sensible child. It was at moments like these that I loved my grandma more than ever. I think if it's dark right now, how can a witch smell the difference between a child and a grown-up? Because grown-ups don't give out stink waves, she said. Only children do. But I don't really give out stink waves, do I said. I'm not giving them out at the very moment, am I? Not to me you aren't, my grandma said. To me, you are smelling like raspberries and cream. To which, you would be smelling absolutely disgusting. What would I smell of? Dog droppings, my grandma said. I reeled. I was stunned. Dog droppings? I cried. I am not smelling of dog droppings. I don't believe it. I won't believe it. What's more, my grandma said, speaking with a touch of relish, to which you're smelling of fresh dog droppings. That simply isn't true, I cried. I know I am not smelling of dogs' droppings, stale or fresh. There's no point in arguing about it. My grandmother said, it's fact of life. I was outraged. I simply cannot bring myself to believe what my grandmother was telling me. So if you see a woman holding her nose as she passes you in the street, she went on, that woman could easily be a witch. I decided to change the subject. Tell me what else to look for a witch. The eyes, the grandma said. Look carefully at the eyes, because the eyes of a real witch are different from yours and mine. Look in the middle of each eye. There is normally a little black dot. If she is a witch, the black dot will keep changing color, and you will see fire, and you will see ice dancing right in the very center of the colored dot. It will send shivers running all over your skin. My grandma leaned back in a chair and sucked away contentedly at a foul black cigar. I squatted on the floor, staring at her fascinated. She was not smiling. She looked deadly serious. Are there other things? I asked. Of course there are other things, my grandma said. You don't seem to understand that witches are not actually women at all. They look like women, they talk like women, and they will to act like women, but in actual fact, they're totally different animals. They're demons in human shape. That is why they have claws and bald heads and queer noses and peculiar eyes, all of which they have to conceal as best as they can from the rest of the world. What else is different from them, Grandma? Their feet. Witches never have toes. No toes. I cried. Then what do they have? They just have feet, my grandma said. The feet have square ends with no toes on them at all. Does that make it difficult to walk? Not at all, my grandma said. But it does give them a problem with their shoes. All ladies like to wear small, rather pointed shoes, but a witch, whose feet are very wide and square at the end, has the most awful job squeezing her feet in those neat little pointed shoes. Why doesn't she wear comfy shoes with square ends? She dare not, my grandma said. Just as she hides her boldness with a wig, she must also hide her ugly witch's feet by squeezing them into pretty shoes. Isn't that terribly uncomfortable? Extremely uncomfortable. But she has to put up with it. If she's wearing ordinary shoes, it won't help me to recognize her, will it, Grandma? I'm afraid it won't. You might possibly see her limping very slightly, but only if you watch very carefully. Are those the only differences then, Grandma? There's one more. Just one more. What is it? Their spit is blue. Blue, I cried. Not blue. Their spit can't be blue. It is blue as blueberry, she said. You don't mean it? Grandmama, nobody can have blue spit. Witches can, she said. It's like ink. Exactly, she said. They even use it to write with. They use those old-fashioned pens that have nibs, and they simply lick the nib. Can you notice the blue spit? Grandma, if a witch was talking to me, would I be able to notice it? Only if you look carefully. If you look very carefully, you would probably see a slight bluish tinge on her teeth, but it doesn't show much. It would if she spat, I said. Witches never spit. They dare not. I couldn't believe my grandma would be lying. She went to church every morning of the week, and she said her grace before every meal. And somebody who did all that never lies. I was beginning to believe every word she spoke. So there you are, Grandma said. That's all about I can tell you. None of this is very helpful. You can still never be absolutely sure whether a woman is a witch or not, just by looking at her. But if she is wearing the gloves, if she has the large nose holes, if she has queer eyes, and the hair she has may look fake and looks like a wig, if she has bluish tinge on her teeth, if she has all these things, then you run like mad. Grandmama, when you were a little girl, did you ever meet a witch? Once, my grandma said. Only once. What happened? I'm not going to tell you, she said. It would frighten you out of your skin and give you bad dreams. Please tell me, I begged. No, she said. Certain things are too horrible to tell about. Does it have something to do with your missing thumb? Suddenly, her old, wrinkled lips shut tight as a pair of tongs. The hand that held the cigar, which had no thumb on it, began to quiver very slightly. I waited. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. All of a sudden, she had suddenly shut herself off completely. The conversation was finished. Good night, Grandma, I said, rising from the floor and kissing her on the cheek. She didn't move. I crept out of the room and went to my bedroom. The next day, a man in a black suit arrived at the house carrying a briefcase. He had a long conversation with my grandma in the living room. I was not allowed in while he was there, but when, at last, he went away, my grandma came in to me, walking very slowly and very sad. The man was reading your father's will, she said. What is a will? I asked. It is something you write before you die, she said. And in it you say who is going to have your money, your property, but most of all, it says who is going to look after your child if both the mother and father is dead. A fearful panic took hold of me. It did say you, Grandma. I cried. I don't have to go to somebody else, do I? No, she said. Your father would never have done that. He had asked me to take care of you for as long as I live. But he has asked me to take you back to your own house in England. He wants us to stay there. But why? Why can't we stay here in Norway? You would hate to live anywhere else. You told me. I know. But there are little complications with money, and with the house that you wouldn't understand. Also, it said in the will that although your family is Norwegian, you were born in England, and you have started your education there, and he wants you to continue going to English schools. Oh, Grandma, I cried. You don't want to go and live in our house in England. I know you don't. Of course I don't, she said. But I am afraid I must. The will said that your mother felt the same way about it, and it is important to respect the wishes of the parents. There was no way out of it. We had to go to England, and my grandmother started making arrangements at once. Your next school term begins in a few days, she said, so we don't have any time to waste. On the evening before we left for England, my grandma got on her favourite subject once again. There are not as many witches in England as there is in Norway, she said. I'm sure I won't meet one, I said. I sincerely hope you wouldn't, because those English witches are probably the most vicious in the whole world. As she sat there smoking her foul cigar and talking away, I couldn't stop looking at the hand that was missing, with the missing thumb. I couldn't help it. I was fascinated by it, and I kept wondering what awful thing had happened during the time when she had made a witch. It must have been something absolutely appalling and gruesome. Otherwise, she would have told me about it. Maybe the thumb had been twisted off, or perhaps she had been forced to jam her thumb down the spout of a boiling kettle until it was steamed away, or did somebody pull it out of her hand like a tooth? I couldn't help trying to guess. Tell me what those English witches do, Grandma said. Well, she said, sucking away her stinking cigar. Their favourite ruse is to mix up powder that will turn a child into a creature or other that all grown-ups hate. What sort of creature? Often it's a slug. A slug is one of their favourites. Then they're going to step on the slug and squish it without knowing it's a child. Or it might be a flea. They might turn you into a flea without realizing what she was doing. Your own mother would get out of a flea pouch. They might turn you into a flea, and without realizing what she was doing, your own mother would get out the flea powder, and then it's goodbye to you. You're making me nervous, Grandma. I don't think I might want to go back to England. I have known English witches, she went on, who had turned children into peasants, and then sneaked the peasants up into the woods the very day before peasant shooting season started. Ouch! So they got shot? Of course they got shot, she said, and then they got plucked and roasted and eaten for supper. I pictured myself as a peasant, flying frantically over the men with the guns, swerving and dipping as the guns exploded below me. Yes, my grandma said, it gives the English witches pleasure to stand back and watch the grown-ups do away with their own children. I really don't want to go to England, Grandmama. Of course you don't, she said, nor do I. But I'm afraid we have to go. Are witches different in every country? Completely different. But I don't know much about other countries. Don't you even know about America? I asked. Not really. Although I've heard about it. The witches over there are able to make the grown-ups eat their own children. Never, I cried. Oh no, Grandma. That couldn't be true. I don't know whether it's true or not. It's only a rumor I've heard. But how could they possibly make them eat their own children? By turning them into hot dogs. That wouldn't be too difficult for a clever witch. Does every single country in the world have its witches? Wherever you find people, you find witches. My grandma said there's a secret society of witches in every country. And do they all know each other? They do not. A witch only knows the witches in her own country. She is strictly forbidden to communicate with any foreign witches. But an English witch, for example, will know all the other witches in England. They're all friends. They ring each other up. They swap deadly recipes. Goodness knows what else they talk about. I hate to think. I sat on the floor watching my grandmother. She sat there with a cigar stub in the ashtray and folded her hands across her stomach. Once a year, she went on, the witches of every separate country hold their own secret meeting. They all get together in one place to receive a lecture from the Grand High Witch of all world. From who? She is the ruler of them all, my grandma said. She is all-powerful. She is without mercy. All other witches are petrified of her. They see her only once a year at the annual meeting. She goes there to whip up the excitement and enthusiasm, and to give them orders. The Grand High Witch travels from country to country, attending their annual meetings. Where do they have these meetings, Grandma? There are all sorts of rumors, my grandma answered. I've heard it said that they just book into a hotel like any other group of women who are holding a meeting. I've heard it that they said there are some peculiar things going on in the hotel they stay in. It is rumored that beds are never slept in, that there are burn marks on the bedroom carpets, that toads are discovered in the bathtubs, and that down in the kitchen, the cook once found a baby crocodile swimming in a saucepan of soup. My grandma picked up her cigar and took another puff, inhaling the foul smoke deeply in her lungs. Where does the Grand High Witch live? When she's at home? I asked. Nobody knows, my grandma said. If we knew that, then she would be rooted out and destroyed. Witchophiles all over the world spend their lives trying to discover the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch. What is a witchophile, Grandma? A person who studies witches and knows a lot about them. Are you a witchophile? I'm a retired witchophile, she said. I'm too old to be active any longer, but when I was young, I traveled all over the world trying to track down the Grand High Witch. I never came close to her, not even close to succeeding. Is she rich? She's rolling, my grandma said, simply rolling in money. Rumor has it there's a machine in her headquarters, which is exactly like the machine the government uses to print up banknotes, and I use. The same banknotes that you and I use. After all, banknotes are only bits of paper with special designs and pictures on them. Anyone can make them with the right machine and the right paper. My guess is that the Grand High Witch makes all the money she wants, and she dishes it out to the witches everywhere. What about foreign money? Those machines can make Chinese money if you want them to. It's only a question of pressing the right button. My grandmama, if nobody has ever seen the Grand High Witch, how can you be sure she exists? She gave me a long and very severe look. Nobody has ever seen the devil, she said, but we know it exists. The next morning, we sailed for England, and soon I was back in the old family house in Kent, but this time, with only my grandmother to look after me. When the Easter term began, and every weekday, I went to school, and everything seemed to have come back to normal again. Now at the bottom of our garden, There's an enormous conker tree, and high up in its branches, Timmy, my best friend, and I had started to build a magnificent tree house. We, we were able to work on it, only at the weekends, but we were able to get along fine. We had begun with the floor, which were built by laying wide planks between two quite far apart branches, nailing them down. Within a month, we had finished the floor. Then we constructed a wooden railing around the floor and then left only the roof to be built. The roof was difficult, but one Saturday afternoon, when Timmy was in bed with flu, I decided to make a start on the roof all by myself. It was lovely being high up there in the conker, all alone, with the pale young leaves coming out everywhere around me. It was like being in a big green cave, and the height made it super exciting. My grandmother had told me that if I fell, I would break my leg, and every time I looked down, I got a tingle along my spine. I worked every day, nailing down, nailing right. Then suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a sight of a woman standing below me. She was looking up at me and smiling in the most peculiar way. When most people smile, their lips go out sideways. This woman's lips went inwards and downwards, showing all of her teeth and gums. The gums were like raw meat. It is always a shock to discover that you are being watched when you think you are alone. And what was that strange woman doing down in there anyways? I noticed that she was wearing a small black hat, and she held black gloves on her head, and the gloves came nearly up to her elbows. Gloves? She was wearing gloves! I froze all over. I have a present for you, she said, still staring at me, still smiling, still showing her teeth and gums. I didn't answer. Come down out of that tree, little boy, she said, and I shall give you the most exciting present you've ever had. Her voice had a curious rasping quality. It made a sort of metallic sound, as though her throat was made full of drawing pins. Without taking her eyes from my face, she very slowly put one of those gloved hands into her purse and drew out a small snake. She held it out for me to see. It's tamed, she said. The snake began to coil itself around her forearm. It was brilliant. If you come down here, I shall give him to you. Oh, Grandma, I thought, come and help me. Then I panicked. I dropped the hammer and shot out the enormous tree like a monkey. I didn't stop until I was as high as possible. And then I stayed there, quivering with fear. I couldn't see the woman now. There were layers and layers of leaves between me and her. I sat there for hours. I kept very still. It began to grow dark. At last, I heard my grandma calling my name. I'm up here, I shouted back. Come down at once, she called out. It's past your supper time. Grandma, I shouted. Has that woman gone? What woman? My grandma called back. The woman in the black gloves. There was silence from below. It was the silence of somebody who was too stunned to speak. Grandma, I shouted again. Has she gone? Yes, Grandma answered at last. She's gone. I'm here, my darling. I'll look after you. You can come down now. I climbed down. I was trembling with fear. My grandmother enfolded me in her arms. I've seen a witch, I said. Come inside, she said. You'll be all right with me. She led me into the house and gave me a cup of hot cocoa with lots of sugar in it. Tell me everything, I told her. By the time I finished, it was my grandma who was trembling. Her face was ash grey, and I saw her glance down at the hand of hers that didn't have a thumb. You know what this means, she said. It means there's one of them in our district. From now on, I'm not letting you walk alone to school. Do you think she could be after me especially? No, she said. I doubt it. One child is as good as any other to those creatures. It's highly surprising that after that I became a very witch-conscious little boy. If I had happened to be alone on the road and saw a woman approaching who was wearing gloves, I would quickly skip across to the other side. As the weather remained pretty cold during the whole month, nearly everybody was wearing gloves. Curiously enough, though, I never saw the woman in the green snake again. That was my first witch, but it wasn't my last. The Easter holidays came and went, and the summer term began at school. My grandmother and I had already planned to take our summer holiday in Norway, and we talked about almost nothing else every evening. She had booked a cabin for each of us in the boat from Newcastle to Oslo at the earliest possible moment after my school broke up. And from Oslo she was about to take me to a place she knew, down on the south coast near Arendal, where she had spent her own summer holidays as a child nearly 80 years ago. All day long, she said, my brother and I were out rowing. The whole coast is dotted with tiny islands and there's nobody on them. We used to explore them and dive into the sea off the lovely smooth granite rocks, and sometimes off the way we could drop the anchor and fish for cod and whiting. If we caught anything, we could build a fire on an island and fry the fish in a pan for our lunch. There's no finer fish in the world than absolutely fresh cod. What did you used to bake? Grandmama, when you were fishing? Mussels, she said. Everybody uses mussels for bait in Norway. If we didn't catch any fish, we would boil the mussels in a saucepan and eat those. Were they good? Delicious, she said. Cook them in seawater and they're tender and salty. What else did you do? We used to row out and wave to the shrimp boats on their way home, and they would stop and give us a handful of shrimps each. The shrimps were still warm from having just been cooked, and we would sit in the rowing boat peeling them and gobbling them up. The head was the best part. The head? You squeeze the head with your teeth and suck out the inside. It's marvelous. You and I would do all those things in the summer, my darling. Grandma, I said, I can't wait. I simply can't. Nor can I. When there were only 3 weeks of the summer term left, an awful thing happened. My grandma got pneumonia. She became very ill. And a trained nurse moved into the house to look after her. The doctor explained to me that pneumonia is not normally a dangerous illness nowadays because of penicillin. But when a person is more than 80 years old, as my grandma, it is very dangerous indeed. He said he didn't even dare to move her to a hospital in a condition. So she stayed in her bedroom, and I hung outside the door while oxygen cylinders and all sorts of other frightening things were taken into her. Can I go in and see? I asked. No, dear, the nurse said. Not at the moment. A fat and jolly lady called Mrs. Spring, who used to come and clean our house every day, also moved in and slept in the house. Mrs. Spring looked after me and cooked my meals. I liked her very much, but she wasn't a patch on my grandmother for telling stories. One evening, about 10 days later, the doctor came downstairs and said to me, You can go in and see your grandmother now, but only for a short time. She's been asking for you. I flew upstairs and burst into my grandmother's arm and room, and threw myself into her arms. Hey there, the nurse said. Be careful with her. Will you be all right, Grandma? I asked. The worst is over. I'll soon be up again. Will she? I asked the nurse. Oh, yes, the nurse answered, smiling. You told us that simply you had to get better because she had to look after you. I gave her another hug. They won't let me have a cigar, she said, but you wait till they're gone. She's a tough old bird, the nurse said. We have her up in another week. The nurse was right. Within a week, my grandmother was stumping around the house with her gold-topped cane and interfering with Mrs. Spring's cooking. I thank you for all your help, Mrs. Spring, she said, but you can go home now. Oh, no, I can't. The doctor told me to see that you take it very easy for the next few days. The doctor said more than that. He dropped a bombshell on my grandmother and me by telling us that on no account were we to risk the journey to Norway this summer. Rubbish, my grandma said. I promise him we'll go. It's too far, the doctor said. It will be very dangerous, but I'll tell you what you can do. You can take your grandson to a nice hotel on the south coast of England instead. The sea air is just what you need. Oh no. Do you want your grandmother to die? The doctor asked me. Never. Then don't let her go on a long journey this summer. She's not yet strong, and to stop her from smoking those vile black cigars. In the end, the doctor had his way about the holiday, but not about the cigars. Rooms were booked for us in the place called the Hotel Magnificent in the famous seaside town of Bournemouth. Bournemouth, my grandma told me, was full of old people like herself. They were tied there by the 1,000 because the air is so embracing and healthy that it kept them so nice and healthy. So they believed it. And so they believed they would be alive for an extra year or so. Does it? Of course not, she said. It's Tommy rot. But just for once, I think we might just obey the doctor. Soon after that, my grandma and I took the train to Bournemouth and settled to the hotel. It was an enormous white building on the seafront and it looked like a pretty boring place to spend the holiday. I had my own separate bedroom, but there was a door connecting my room to my grandma. Just before we left Bournemouth, my grandmother had given me a consolation, a present or two, a present of 2 white mouse in a little cage, and of course I took them with me. They were terrific fun. Those mouse, I called them William and Mary. And in the hotel, I sat outright away teaching them how to do tricks. The first trick I taught them to do was creep up the sleeve of my jacket and come out by my neck. Then I taught them to climb up to the back of my neck on the top of my head, and I did this by putting cake crumbs on my hair. On the very first morning after our arrival, the chambermaid was making my bed when one of those mice poked its head from under the sheets. The maid let out a shriek, then brought a dozen people running to see who was being murdered. I was reported to the manager. There followed an unpleasant scene in the manager's office, with the manager, my grandma, and me. The manager, whose name was Mr. Stringer, was a bristling man in a black-tailed coat. "I cannot permit mice in my hotel, madam," he said to my grandma. "How dare you tell them that your hotel is rotten full of rats anyway?" my grandma said. "Rats!" cried Mrs. Stinger, going more in the face. "There are no rats in the hotel." "I saw one this morning," my grandma said. "It was running down the corridor in the kitchen." "That is not true. You had better get the rat catcher in at once," my grandma said, "or if I report you to the public health authorities. I expect this rat scuttling all over the kitchen floors and stealing food off the shelves and jumping in and out of the soup." "Never!" cried Mrs. Stringer. "No wonder why my breakfast toast was all nibbled round the edges this morning," my grandmother went on relentlessly. "No wonder it had a nasty ratty taste. If you're not careful, the house people will be ordering the entire hotel to be closed before everyone gets typhoid fever." "You're not being serious, madam." "I was never more serious in my life. Are you or are you not going to allow my grandson to keep this mice in his room?" The manager knew that he was beaten. "May I suggest a compromise, madam? I will permit him to keep this in his room as long as they are never allowed out of the cage. How's that?" "That will suit us very well." And she stood up and marched out of the room with me behind her. There's no way you can train mice inside a cage. Yet I dared not to let him out because the chambermaid was spying me all the time. She had a key to my door and she kept bursting in and out all hours, trying to catch me with the mice out of the cage. She told me that the first mouse to break the rules would be drawn in a bucket and drowned. I decided to seek a safer place where I would carry out this training. There must surely be an empty room in the enormous hotel. I put one mouse into each trouser pocket and wandered downstairs in the search of a secret spot. The ground floor of the hotel was a maze. All of them named gold letters on the doors, and I wandered through the lounge, the smoking room, the card room, the reading room, the drawing room. None of them were empty. I went down a long, wide corridor, and at last I came to the ballroom. There were double doors leading into it, and in front of the doors there were a large notice on a stand. The notice on the board said, "RSPCG meeting. Strictly private. This room is reserved for the annual meeting of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children." The double doors in the room were open. I peeped in. It was a colossal room. There were rows and rows of chairs, all facing a platform. The chairs were painted gold, and they had little red cushions of seats, but there was not a soul in sight. I stood cautiously in the room. What a lovely secret silent place it was. The meeting of the Royal Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Children must have taken place early in the day, and now they had all gone home. Even if they hadn't, even if they did just come pouring in, they would be wonderful, kind people, who would look like they would favor upon a young mouse trainer going about his business. At the back of the room, there was a large folding screen with a Chinese dragon painted on it. I decided, just to be on the safe side, to go behind the screen and do my training there. I wasn't a bit frightened of the prevention of cruelty to children people, but there was always a chance that Mr. Stringer, the manager, might pop his head around the door. If he saw the mice, the poor things would be in the hall, poured his bucket of the water, but I could shout stop. I tiptoed to the back of the room and settled myself on the thick green carpet behind the big screen. What a splendid place this was, ideal for mouse training. I took William and Mary out of my trouser pockets. They sat beside me on the carpet and quiet, well behaved. The trick I was going to teach them today was tightrope walking. It is not all that difficult to train an intelligent mouse to be an expert tightrope walker, provided you know exactly what to do. First, you must have a piece of string. I had. Then, you must have some good cake. A fine currant cake is the favorite food of white mice. They are dotty about it. I had brought them with me. A rock cake, which I had pocketed with having tea with Grandmama the day before. Now, here's what you do. You stretch the string tight between your two hands, but you start by keeping it very short, only about 3 inches. You put the mouse on your right hand and a little piece of cake on your left hand. The mouse is therefore only 3 inches away from the cake. He can see it, he can smell it. His whiskers twitch with excitement. He can almost reach the cake by leaning forward, but not quite. He only has to take 2 steps along the string to reach his tasty morsel. He ventures forward one paw on the string, then the other. If the mouse has a good sense of balance, and most of them have, he will get across easily. I started with William. He walked the string without a moment's hesitation. I let him have a quick nibble of the cake, just to see just to whet his appetite. Then I put him back on the right hand of mine. This time, I lengthened the string. I made it about 6 inches long. William knew what to do now. With superb balance, he walked step by step along the string until he reached the cake. He was rewarded with another nibble. Quite soon, William was walking a 24-inch tightrope from one hand to the other to reach the cake. It was wonderful to watch. He was enjoying himself tremendously. I was careful to hold the string near the carpet so that if he did lose his balance, he wouldn't have far to fall, but he never fell. William was obviously a natural acrobat, a great tightrope walking mouse. Now it was Mary's turn. I put William on the carpet beside me, and I rewarded him with some extra crumbs and a currant. Then I started going through the same routine all over again with Mary. My blinding ambition, you see, my dreams of dreams, was to become one day the owner of a white mouse circus. I would have a stage with red curtains in front of it, and when the curtains were drawn apart, the audience would see my world-famous performing my size walking on tightropes, swinging from trapeze, turning somersaults in the air, bouncing on trampolines, and all the rest of it. I would have white mice riding on my white rats, and the rats would gallop furiously around and around the stage. I was all beginning to picture myself traveling with first class all over the globe with my famous white mouse circus, and performing before all the crowded heads of Europe. I was about halfway through Mary's training when suddenly I heard voices outside the ballroom door. The sound grew louder and louder until it swelled into a great babble of speech from my many throats. I recognized the voice of the awful hotel manager, Mr. Stringer. Help, I thought, but thank heavens for a huge screen. I crouched behind it and peered through the crack between two of the folding sections. I could see the entire length and width of the ballroom without anyone seeing me. "Well, ladies, I am sure you'll be quite comfortable in here," Mr. Stringer's voice was saying. Then in through the double doors he marched, black-tailed coat and all, spreading his arms wide as he ushered in a great flock of ladies. "If there is anything we can do for you, do not hesitate to let me know," he went on. "Tea will be served for all of you on the Sunshine Terrace after you conclude your meeting." With that, he bowed and scraped himself out of the room as a vast herd of ladies from the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children came streaming in. They were all wearing pretty clothes, and all of them had hats on their heads. Now that the manager had gone, I was not particularly alarmed. What better than to be imprisoned in a room full of splendid ladies? If I ever got talking to them, I would even suggest that they come to do a bit of cruelty to children preventing at my school. We could certainly use them there. In they came, taking their heads off. They began milling around, choosing their seats, and there was a whole lot of stuff like, "Come on, sit next to me, Millie dear." "Oh, hello, Beatrice. I haven't seen you since the last meeting. What an adorable dress you have on." I decided to stay where I was and let them get on with the meeting while I got on with my mouse training. But I watched them for a while longer through the crack of the screen, waiting for them to settle down. How many were there? I guessed about 200. The back rows filled up first. They all seemed to want to sit as far back from the platform as possible. There was a lady wearing a tiny green hat in the middle of the black back row, who kept scratching the nape of her neck. She couldn't leave it alone. It fascinated me the way he kept her fingers keep scratching away at her hair on the back of her neck. Had she known that somebody was watching her from behind, I'm sure she would have been embarrassed. I wondered if she had dandruff. All of a sudden, I noticed that the lady next to her was doing the same thing, and the next one, and the next one. The whole lot of them were doing it. They were all scratching away like mad at their hair, on the backs of their necks. Did they have fleas in their hair? More likely it was nits. A boy at school called Ashton had some kind of nits in his hair last term, and the matron had made him dip his whole head in turpentine. It killed the nits all right, but it nearly killed Ashton as well. Half the skin came off of his scalp. I began to be fascinated by the hair-scratching ladies. It is always funny when you catch someone doing something coarse and she thinks no one is looking. Nose picking, for example, or scratching her bottom. Hair scratching is very nearly as unattractive, especially if it goes on and on. I decided it had to be nits. Then the most astonishing happened. I saw one lady pushing her fingers underneath the hair on her head, and the entire head of the hair, lifted upwards, all in one piece. And the hand slid underneath, the hair went on scratching. She was wearing a wig. She was wearing gloves. I glanced swiftly around at the rest of the now seated audience. Every single one of them were wearing gloves. My blood turned to ice. I began to shake all over. I glanced frantically behind me for a black back door to escape through. There wasn't one. Should I leap out from behind the screen and make a dash for the double doors? Those double doors were already closed, and I would be seeing a woman standing in front of them. She was bending forward and fixing some sort of metal chain round the two door handles. Keep still, I told myself. No one has seen you yet. There's no reason in the whole wide world you should come over and look behind the screen. One false move, one cough, one sneeze, one nose blow, one little sound of any sort, and it won't be just one witch who gets you. It will be 200. At that point, I think I fainted. The whole thing was altogether too much for a small boy to cope with. But I can't believe I was out for more than a few seconds when I came to. I was lying on the carpet, and I was still, thank heavens, behind the screen. There was about silence all around me. Rather shakily, I got to my knees and peered once again through the crack of the screen. All the women, or rather the witches, were now sitting motionless in their chairs and staring as though hypnotized at somebody who had suddenly appeared on the platform. That somebody was another woman. The first thing I noticed about this woman was her head size. She was tiny, probably no more than 4.5 feet tall. She looked quite young. I guess about 25 or 6. And she was very pretty. She had on a rather stylish long black dress that reached right to the ground, and she wore black gloves that came up from her elbows. Unlike the others, she wasn't wearing a hat. She didn't look to me like a witch at all, but she possibly couldn't be one. Otherwise, what on earth was she doing up there on the platform, and why, for heaven's sake, were all the other witches gazing at her with such a mix of adoration, awe, and fear? Very slowly, the young lady on the platform raised her hands to her face. I saw her gloves, fingers, unhook something from behind her ears, and then she caught hold of her cheeks and lifted her face clean away. The whole of that pretty face came away in her hands. It was a mask. As she took off the mask, she turned sideways and placed it upon a small table nearby. And when she turned around again and faced us, I very nearly screamed out loud. That face of hers was the most frightful and frightening thing I'd ever seen. Just looking at it gave me the shakes all over. It was so crumpled and wizened, so shrunken and shriveled, it looked as though it had been pickled in vinegar. It was a most fearsome and ghastly sight. There was something terribly wrong with it, something foul and putrid, and decayed. It seemed quite literally to be rotting away at the edges, in the middle of the face, around the mouth and the cheeks, though maggots were working away in there. There are times when something is so frightful, you become mesmerized by it, and can't look away. I was like that now. I was transfixed. I was numbed. I was magnetized by the sheer horror of that woman's features. But there was one more thing to that. There was a look of serpent in those eyes of hers as they flashed around the audience. I knew immediately, of course, that this was none other than the Grand High Witch herself. I knew also why she had worn a mask. She could never have moved around in public, let alone book in a hotel with her face revealed. Everyone who saw her would have ran away screaming, shouting the doors. The Grand High Witch in her voice and filled the room and bounced around the walls. Are the chains locked and bolted? The doors are chained and bolted, your grandness, answered a voice in the audience. The brilliant snake's eyes that were set so deep in the dreadful worm-eating face glared unblinkingly at the witches who sat facing her. You may remove your gloves, she shouted. Her voice, I noticed, had that same hard metallic quality as the voice of the witch I had met under the conker tree, only it was far louder and much, much harsher. It rasped and grated, it snarled and scraped, it shrieked and it growled. Everyone in the room was peeling off her gloves. I was watching the hands of those in the back rows. I wanted to very much see what their fingers looked like, and whether my grandmother had been right. I could see several of them now. I could see the brown claws covering every of their tips. They were about 2 inches long, those claws sharp at the ends. You may remove your shoes, barked the Grand High Witch. I heard a sigh of relief going up from all the witches in the room as they kicked off their narrow, high-heeled shoes. And then I got a glimpse under the chairs of several pairs of stocked feet, square and completely toeless. Revolting they were, as though the toe had been sliced away from the feet of the carving knife. You may remove your wigs, snarled the Grand High Witch. She had a peculiar way of speaking. There was some sort of foreign accent there, something harsh and guttural, as she seemed to be having trouble pronouncing the letter W. As well as that, she did something very funny with the letter R. She would roll it around and round her mouth like a piece of hot pork crackling before it's spitting it out. "Remove your wigs! Get some fresh air in your spotty scalps!" she shouted, and another sigh of relief arose from the audience as all the hands went up to the heads and all the wigs, with the hats still on them, were lifted away. There now appeared in front of me, rows upon rows of bold females, assumed naked sculpts, every one of them red and itchy, looking from being rubbed by the linings of their wigs. I cannot simply tell you how awful they were, and somehow the whole sight was made more grotesque because underneath those frightening scabby bald heads the bodies were dressed in fashionable and rather pretty clothes. It was monstrous. It was unnatural. Oh heavens, I thought. Oh help. Oh Lord, have mercy on me. The foul bald-headed females are child killers, every one of them. And here I am, imprisoned in the same room I cannot escape. At that point, a new and double horrifying thought struck me. My grandmother had said that there's special nose holes that can smell like a child on a pitch-black night from right across the other side of the road. Up till now, my grandmother had been right, every time. It seemed as certain, therefore, that one of the witches in the back row was going to sniff me out at any moment and then yell out, "Dog droppings!" And everyone would go all over the room, and I would be cornered like a rat. And now, on the carpet behind the screen, hardly daring to breathe. Then suddenly, I remembered another very important thing that grandmother told me. The dirtier, the harder it is for a witch to smell you out. How long since I had last had a bath? Not for ages. I had my own room in the hotel, and that my grandfather never bothered with silly things like that. Come to think of it, I don't believe I had a bath since we arrived. When I had last washed my face, my hands, certainly not this morning either, not yesterday. I glanced down at my hands. They were covered with smudge and mud, and goodness knows what else besides. So perhaps I had a chance after all. The stink waves couldn't possibly get out through all the dirt. "Witches of England!" shouted the Grand High Witch. She herself, I noticed, had not taken off either her wig or her gloves and her shoes. "Witches of England!" she yelled. The audience stirred uneasily and sat up straighter in the chairs. "Miserable witches!" she yelled. "Useless, lazy witches! Feeble, fribbling witches! You are a heap of idle, good-for-nothing worms!" A shudder went through the audience. The Grand High Witch was clearly in ugly mood, and they knew it. I had a feeling that something awful was going to happen soon. "I'm having my breakfast this morning," cried the Grand High Witch. "I'm looking out for the riddle of the beach. And what am I being? I am asking you, what am I being? I am being a revolting sight, and of being hundreds. I am seeing thousands of rotten, repulsive little children playing on the sun. It is putting me right off my food. Why have you not gotten rid of them?" she screamed. "Why have you not rubbed them all out, these filthy, smelly children?" With each word she spoke, flecks of pale blue flame shot out from her mouth like little bullets. "I am asking you why," she screamed. Nobody answered her question. Children smelled. She screamed. They stunk out the world. "We do not want these children around here." These bold heads in the audience all nodded vigorously. "One child a week is no good for me," the Grand High Witch shouted and cried out. "Is that the best you can do?" "We will do better," murmured the audience. "We will do much better." "Better is not good enough," shrieked the Grand High Witch. "I demand maximum results. So here are my orders. My orders are that every single child in this country shall be rubbed out, squashed, squirted, squivered, and frittered before I come here again in 1 year's time. Do I make myself clear?" A great gasp went up from the audience. I saw the witches of all at one around either of them were deeply troubled expressions. All I heard one witch said was at the end of the front row saying aloud, "All of them? We can't possibly wipe out all of them." The Grand High Witch whipped out as though someone had stuck a skewer into her bottom. "Who said that?" she snapped. "Who dares argue with me? It was you, was it not?" She pointed a gloved finger, as sharp as a needle, at the witch who had spoken. "I didn't mean it, your grandness," the witch cried. "I didn't mean to argue. I was just talking to myself." "You dare to argue with me?" screamed the Grand Witch. "I was just talking to myself," cried the witch. "I swear it, your grandness." She began to shake with fear. The Grand High Witch took a quick step forward And she spoke again. It was in a voice that made my blood run cold. A stupid witch who answers back must burn until her bones are black. She screamed. No, no, no! Begged the witch in front row. The Grand High Witch went on. Our foolish witch without a vein was sizzled in the fiery flame. Save me! Cried the wretched witch in the front row. The Grand High Witch took no notice of her. She spoke again. An idiot witch like you must roast upon the barbecue. Forgive me, oh your grandness! Cried the miserable culprit. I didn't mean it. But the Grand High Witch continued her terrible recital. A witch who dares to say I'm wrong will not be with us very long. A moment later, a stream of sparks that looked like tiny, white, hot metal fillings came shooting out of the Grand High Witch's eyes and flew straight towards the one who had dared to speak. I saw the sparks striking against her and burrowing her into her, and she screamed a horrible howling scream, and a puff of smoke arose from around her. A smell of burning meat filled the room. Nobody moved. Like me, they were all watching the smoke. And when it hit and it cleared, the chair was empty. I caught a glimpse of something wispy white, like a little cloud floating upwards and disappearing out of the window. A great sigh rose from the audience. The Grand High Witch glared around the room. And I hope nobody else is going to make me cross today, she remarked. There was a deathly silence. Frizzled like a fritter, the Grand High Witch cooked like a carrot. You will never see her again. Now we will continue with our business. Children are revolting, screamed the Grand High Witch. We will wipe them all away. We will scrub them off the face of the earth. We will flush them down the drain. Yes, 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 cried the audience. Wipe them away. Scrubbing them off the earth. Flush them down the drain. Children are foul and filthy, sounded the Grand High Witch. There they are, chorused the English witches. They are foul and filthy. Children are dirty and stinky, screamed the Grand High Witch. Dirty and stinky, cried the audience, getting more and more worked up. Children are smelling dog droppings, screeched the Grand High Witch. Pooh, cried the audience. Pooh, pooh, pooh. They're worse than Vogue's droppings. They are worse than Vogue droppings, screeched the Grand High Witch. Vogue droppings is smelling like violets and primroses compared to children. Violets and primroses, cried the audience. They were clapping and cheering almost every word spoken from the platform. The speaker seemed to have them completely under her spell. To talk about the children is making me sick, screamed the Grand High Witch. I am feeling sick even thinking about them. Fetch me a basin. The Grand High Witch paused and glared at the mass of eager faces in the audience. They waited, wanting more. So now, barked the Grand High Witch. So now, I have a plan. I am going to a gigantic plan for getting rid of every single child in the whole England. The witches gasped. They gaped, they turned on and gave each other ghoulish grins of excitement. Yes, thundered the Grand High Witch. We are she. We will wish and envelop them, and we will make them disappear. Every single smelly little brat in England will stroke. Whoopee, cried the witches, clapping their hands. You are brilliant. Oh, your grandness. You are fantabulous. Shut up and listen, snapped the Grand High Witch. Listen very carefully, and let us not be having any muck-ups. The audience leaned forward, eager to learn how to make this magic that was going to be performed. Each and every one of you, thundered the Grand High Witch, is going to go back to your hometowns immediately and resign from your jobs. Resign! Give notice! Retire! We will, they cried. We will resign from our jobs. And after you resign from your jobs, the Grand High Witch went on, each and every one of you will be going out and we will be buying. She paused. What will we be buying? She cried. Tell us. Oh, brilliant one. What is it we shall be buying? Buying. Sweet shops, said the Grand High Witch. Sweet shops, they cried. Why are we going to buy sweet shops? What a frumpious wheeze. Each one of you will be buying for herself a sweet shop. You will be buying the very best and most respectable sweet shops in England. We will, they answered. Their dreadful voices were like a chorus of dentist drills all grinding away together. I am wanting no tuberty, happily, crummy little tobacco-selling newspaper sweet shop, shouted the Grand High Witch. I am wanting you to get only the very best shops, filled up with high mint piles and piles of luscious sweets and tasty chocks. The best, they cried. We shall buy the best sweets in town. You will be having no trouble in getting what you want, shouted the Grand High Witch, because you will be offering 4 times as much as the shop is worth, and nobody is refusing to any offer like that. Money is not a problem to us witches, as you very know well. I have brought with me 6 trunks stuffed full of English banknotes, all new and crisp, and all of them, she added, with a French layer, all of them homemade. The witches in the audience grinned, appreciating this joke. At the point, one foolish witch was so excited at the possibilities presented by owning a sweet shop that she leapt to her feet and shouted, "Your children will become flocking to my shop. I will feed them poisoned sweet shops and poisoned chocks and wipe them out like weasels." The room became silent. I saw the tiny body of the Grand High Witch stiffen and go rigid with rage. "Who spoke?" she shrieked. "It was you! You over there!" The culprit sat down fast and covered her face with her clawed hands. "You blithering bumpkin!" screeched the Grand High Witch. "You brilliant skull bumper! Are you not realizing that if you are going round poisoning little children, you will be caught in 5 minutes flat? Never in my life am I hearing such a relishing suggestion from a witch." The entire audience cowered and shook. I'm quite sure they all thought, as I did, the terrible white hot sparks were about to fly again. Curiously enough, they didn't. "Such tom-fiddling idea is all you can be coming up with," thundered the Grand High Witch. "Then it is no wonder England is storming with rotten little children." There was another silence. The Grand High Witch glared at the witches in the audience. "Do you not know?" she shouted at them. "We witches are working only with magic." "We know, your Grandness," they all answered. "Of course we know." The Grand High Witch grated her bony gloved hands against each other and cried out, "So each of you is only a magnificent sweet shop. The next is each of you will be announcing the window of your shop that on a certain day you will be having a great gala opening with 3 sweet shops and chocks to every child. They will bring them in, and greedy little brutes," cried the audience. "They will be fighting to get through the door. Next," continued the Grand High Witch, "you will be preparing yourself for this great gala opening by filling every choc and every sweet in your shop with my very latest and greatest magic formula. This is known as Formula 87 Delayed Action Mouse Maker." "Delayed Action Mouse Maker," they chanted. "She's done it again. Her Grandness has concerted it yet. Another of her wondrous magic child killers. How do we make it, oh brilliant one?" "Exercise patience," answered the Grand High Witch. "First, I am explaining to you how my formula 86 Delayed Action Mouse Maker is working. Listen carefully." "We are listening," cried the audience, who were now jumping up and down in their chairs with excitement. "Delayed Action Mouse Worker is a great liquid," explained the Grand High Witch, "and 1 droplet in each choc or sweet will be quite enough. So here's what happens. Child eats chocolate, which has it in Delayed Action Mouse Maker Wicked. Child goes home feeling fine. Child goes to bed still feeling fine. Child wakes up in the morning feeling fine. Child goes to school feeling fine. Formula, you understand, is delayed action, and is not working yet." "We understand, old brainy one," cried the audience. "But when does it start working? Is it starting to work at exactly 9 o'clock when the child is arriving at school?" shouted the Grand High Witch triumphantly. "Child arrives at school. Delaying Action Mouse Worker immediately starts to work. Child starts to shrink. Child is starting to grow fur. Child is starting to grow tail. All is happening in precisely 26 seconds. After 26 seconds, child is no longer a child. It is a mouse." "A mouse?" cried the witches. "What a frumpious thought! Classrooms will all be swarming with mice," shouted the Grand High Witch. "Chaos and pandemonium will be reigning in every school in England. Children and teachers will be hopping up and down. Women teachers will be standing on desks and holding up skirts and yelling, 'Help, help, help.'" They will," cried the audience. "And what," shouted the Grand High Witch, "is happening next in every school? Tell us," they cried. "Tell us, oh brainy one." The Grand High Witch stretched her stingy neck forward and grinned at the audience, showing 2 rows of pointy teeth, slightly blue. She raised her voice louder than ever before. "Mousetraps is coming out." "Mousetraps?" cried the witches. "Any cheese?" shouted the Grand High Witch. "Of course there is cheese." Teachers is all rushing and running out and getting mousetraps and baiting them with cheese and putting them down all over school. Mice is nibbling cheese. Mousetraps is going off, and all over the school, mousetraps is going snappity snap, and all over England, in every school in England, noise of snapping mousetraps will be heard. At that point, the disgusting old Grand High Witch began to do a sort of witch's dance down the platform, stamping her feet and clapping her hands. The entire audience joined in the clapping and the foot stamping, and they were making such tremendous racket that I thought surely Mr. Stringer would hear it, and became the door, but he didn't. Then above all the noise, I heard the voice of the Grand High Witch screaming out some sort of awful gloating song. "Down with the children, don't do them in, boil their bones and fry their skin. Bish them, squish them, bash them, mash them, break them, snake them, slash them, smash them. Offer talks with magic powder. Say eat up, then say it louder. Cram they full with sticky eats. Send them home so guzzling sweet. And in the morning, little fools go marching off to separate schools. A girl feels sick and goes all pale. She yells, "Hey look, I've grown a tail." A boy who's standing next to her screams, "Help! I think I'm growing fur." Another shouts, "We look like freaks. The whiskers growing on cheeks." A boy who's was extremely tall cries out, "What's wrong? I'm growing small." 4 tiny legs begin to sprout from everybody round about. And all at once, all in trice, there are no children, only mice. In every school is mice galore, or running round the schoolroom floor. And all the poor demented teachers is yelling, "Hey, who are these creatures?" They stand up on the desk and shout, "Get out, you filthy mouse, get out. Will someone fetch the mouse traps, please? And don't forget to bring the cheese." Now, mouse trap, come, and every trap goes snippity snip, snappity snap. The mouse traps have a powerful string. The springs go crack and snap and ping. It's lovely noise for us to hear. It's music to a witch's ear. Dead mice is every place around, power to feet deep upon the ground. With teachers surfing left and right, but not a single child in sight. What's going on? Where's all the children gone? It's 9:30, and as a rule, they're never late as for the school. Poor teachers read, and just a few, some sit and read, just a few, amuse themselves throughout the day by sweeping all these mice away, and all witches shout, "Hooray!" I hope you haven't forgotten that while all this was going on, I was still stuck behind the screen on my hands and knees with one eye glued to the crack. I don't know how long I had been there, but it seemed like forever. For the worst part, it was not being allowed to cough or make a sound. And knowing that if I did, I was good as dead, and all along the way, throughout this, I was living in a constant terror that one of my witches in the back row was going to whip out my presents through those special nose holes of hers. My only hope as I saw it was the fact that I hadn't washed for days, that and for never-ending excitement and clapping and shouting that was going on in the room. The witches would think of nothing except the Grand Witch up there, or the platform, and her great plan for wiping out all the children of England. They certainly weren't sniffing around for a child in the room. In their wildest dreams, if witches have dreams, they would never have occurred to of them. I kept still and prayed. The Grand Witch's dreadful gloating songs were over now, and the brilliant audience was clapping madly, shouting, "Sensational! Marvelous! You are the genius or brainy one." It was a thrilling invention, that delayed action mouse maker. It is a winner, and the beauty of that is that the teachers will be the ones who bump off their stinky little children. It won't be us doing it. We shall never be caught. "Witches have never caught," the Grand Witches said. "Attention now. I want everybody's attention, for I am about to tell you what you are going to do to make the formula for the 86 delayed action mouse maker." Suddenly there came a great gasp from the audience. This was followed by a hubbub of shrieking and yelling. I saw many witches leaping to their feet and pointing at the platform, crying out, "Mice, mice, mice! She's done it to show us! The brainy ones turned 2 children into mice, and there they are!" I looked towards the platform. The mice were all right there, 2 of them running around the Grand Witch's skirts. But they were not field mice, or house mice, or wood or harvest mice. They were white mice. I recognized them immediately as my own little William and Mary. "Mice," they shouted. "Our leader has made us mice to appear out of nowhere. Get the mouse traps, fetch the cheese." I saw the Grand Witch peering down at the floor and staring with obvious puzzlement at William and Mary. She bent lower to get a closer look. Then she straightened up and shouted, "Quiet!" The audience became silent and sat down. "These mice have nothing to do with me," she shouted. These mice are pit mice. These mice I quite obviously belong to some repellent little child in the hotel. A boy it will be for, certainly, because girls are not keeping pet mice. "A boy," cried witches. "A filthy smelling boy. We'll swipe him, we'll swoosh him. We'll have no tripes for breakfast." "Silence!" shouted the Grand Witch, shouting and raising her hands. "You know very perfectly Well, you must do nothing to draw attention to yourself while you are living in the hotel. Let us by all means get rid of this evil-smelling little squirt, but we must do it as quietly as possible. For we are not all of this, but the respectable ladies of the Royal Society of the Prevention of Cruelty of Children. What do you suggest then, O Brainy One? They cried out. How shall we dispose of this small pile of filth? They're talking about me, I thought. These females are actually talking about how to kill me? I began to sweat. Whoever he is not important, announced the Grand High Witch. Leave him to me. I shall smell him out and turn him into a mackerel and have him washed up for supper. Bravo, cried the witches. Cut his head off and chop him off his tail and fry him in the hot butter. You can imagine that none of this was making me very comfortable. William and Mary were still running around the platform, and I saw the Grand High Witch aim with a swift raining kick at the William. She caught him right on the point of her toe and sent him flying. She did the same to Mary. Her aim was extraordinary. She would have made a great football player, but mice crashed against the wall, and for a few moments they stayed stunned. Then they got to their feet and scampered away. Attention again, they cried, Grand High Witch, who was shouting. I will now give you a recipe for concocting Formula 86 Delayed Action Mouse Maker. Get out pencils and paper. Handbags were open and all over the room, and note bags were fished out. Get us the recipe, old Brainy One, cried the audience. Tell us the secret. First, the Grand High Witch had to find something that would cause the children to become very small quickly. And what is that? Cried the audience. And that part was simple, the Grand High Witch said. All you have to do is, all you are wishing to make a child very small is to look at him through the wrong end of a telescope. She's a wonder, cried the audience. Who else would have thought of that? So you take the wrong end of the telescope, continued the Grand High Witch, and you boil it until it gets soft. How long does that take? They asked her. 21 hours of boiling, answered the Grand High Witch. And while this is going on, you take exactly 45 brown mice and make sure you chop off their tails and carve a knife, and you fry the tails in the hair oil until they are nice and crisp. What do we do when all those mice who have had their tails chopped off? Asked the audience. You simmer them in frog juice for 1 hour, came this answer. But listen to me. So far I've given you the recipe. It's easy. The real difficult problem is to put in something that will make a genuine delayed action result. Something that can be eaten by children on a certain day, which will not start working on in them until 9 o'clock the next morning when they start at school. What did you come up with, O Brainy One? They called out. Tell us the great secret. The secret, announced the Grand High Witch. An alarm clock, they cried. It's a stroke of genius. Of course it is. The Grand High Witch said, you can set a 24-hour alarm clock today, and at exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow it will go off. But we will need 5 million alarm clocks, cried the audience. We will need one for each child. Idiot, the Grand High Witch said. If you are wanting a steak, you do not cook the whole cow. It is the same one with the alarm clocks. One clock will be enough for 1,000 children. Here's what you do. Set your alarm clock to go off at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Then roast it in the oven until it's crisp and tender. Are you writing this down? We are, your Grandness. We are, they cried. Next, said the Grand High Witch, you take your boiled telescope of your fried mouse tails, and you cook your mice and roasted alarm clock all together and put them in the mixer. Then you put them in at full speed. They will give you nice, thick paste. While the mixer is still going, you must add to it the yolk of a gruntle's egg. A gruntle's egg, the audience cried. We shall do that. Underneath all the clamour that was going on, I heard one of the witches in the back row saying to the neighbour, I'm getting a bit old to go bird nesting these days. Those ruddy gruntle snakes always nest up very high. So you mix in the egg, the Grand High Witch went on. One after the other, you mix into the following items. The claw of a cramble crunker, the beak of a blabbersnitch, the snout of a grubble squirt, and the tongue of a capper stringer. I trust you are not having any trouble finding those. Not at all, they cried out. You will spare the blabbersnitch, trap the crab cruncher, and shoot the gobble squirt. Excellent, the Grand High Witch said. When you have mixed everything together in the mixer, you will have a marvellous looking green liquid. And just one drop of this liquid into a chocolate or sweet at 9 o'clock the next morning, the child who ate it will turn into a mouse in 26 seconds. Next, one word of warning. Never increase the dose. It will put more than one drop into each sweet or chocolate, and never again more than one sweet or chocolate to each child. An overdose of delayed action mouse maker will make up the timing of the alarm clock and cause the child to turn into a mouse too early. A large overdose might even have an instant effect, and you wouldn't want that. You wouldn't want your children turning into mice right away. There in your sweet shop. That would not give the game away. Be very careful. Do not overdose. The Grand High Witch was starting to talk again. I am now going to prove to you, she said, that this recipe is working to perfection. You understand? Of course, and that you can set the alarm clock go off at any time you like. It does not have to be at 9 o'clock. So yesterday, I personally prepared a small quantity magic formula in order to give you a public demonstration by making one small change in the recipe. Before I am roasting the alarm clock, I am setting it to go off not at 9 o'clock the next morning, but at 3:30 the next afternoon, which means 3:30 this afternoon. And that, she said, glancing at her wristwatch, is precisely 7 minutes from this time. The audience of witches were listening intently, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. So what am I going to do with this magic liquid? Asked the Grand High Witch. I will tell you what I am going to do. I am putting one droplet of it into a very squishy chocolate bar. I am giving this bar to a repulsive smiling little boy who is hanging around the lobby of the hotel. The Grand High Witch paused. The audience remained silent, waiting for her to go on. A watch of this repulsive little brute gobbling up this grisly little bar of chocolate, and when he had finished, I said to him, "Was that good?" He said it was great. So I said to him, "Would you like some more?" And he said, "Yes." So I said, "I'll give you 6 more chocolate bars like that if you meet me in the ballroom of this hotel at 25 past tomorrow." 6 bars? Cried this greedy little swine. "I'll be there." "You bet I'll be there." "The stage is set," said the Grand High Witch. "The proof of pudding is about to begin." "The proof of pudding is about to begin," everyone repeated. "Do not forget that before I'm roasting the alarm clock yesterday, I am setting it to 3:30 today. It is now," she glanced at her watch, "exactly now 25 minutes past 3, and the little snatcher who will be turning into a mouse in 5 minutes' time should be at the door at this very moment." And by gum, she was looking at that absolutely right. The boy, whoever he might be, was already rattling at the door and banging on the doors with his fists. "Quick!" the Grand High Witch shouted. "Put on your wigs, put on your gloves, and put on your shoes." There was a great rustle and bustle putting on the wigs and shoes and hats. And I saw the Grand High Witch herself reach for a mask and put it on her revolting face of hers. It was astonishing how the mask transformed her. All of a sudden, she became once again a rather pretty young lady. "Let me in!" came the boy's voice from behind the down. "Where are the chocolate bars you promised? I meant to collect them. Just them out." "He is not only smelly, but he's also greedy," said the Grand High Witch. "Remove the chains from the door and let him come in." The extraordinary thing about the mask was that its lips moved quite naturally when she spoke. You really couldn't see it with the mask at all. One of the witches leapt to her feet, unfastened the chains. She opened the 2 huge doors. Then he heard him say, "Why, hello, little man. How lovely to see you. You have come for your chocolate bars, have you not? They are all ready for you. Do you come in?" A small boy wearing a white t-shirt and grey shorts and gym shoes entered the room. I recognized him at once. He was Bruno Jenkins. He was staying in the hotels with his parents. I didn't care for him. He was one of those boys who was always eating something whenever you meet him. Meet him in the hotel lobby and he's stuffing sponge cake in his mouth. Pass him in the corridor and he's fishing potato chips out of the bag by the fistful. Catch sight of him in the hotel garden and he's whooping dairy milk and has 2 bar more sticking out of his trouser pockets. What's more, Bruno never stopped boasting about how his father made more money than my father and that they owned 3 cars, or worse than that. Yesterday morning I found out him kneeling on the flat flagstones of the hotel terrace with a magnifying glass in his hands. There was a column of ants marching across one of the flagstones, and Bruno Jenkins was focusing the sun through the magnifying glass and roasting the ants one by one. "I like watching them burn," he said. "That's horrible," I cried. "Stop doing it." "Let's see how you stop me," he said. At that point, I pushed him with all my might and had crashed him sideways onto the flagstones. His magnifying glass had splintered into many pieces, and he had leapt up shrieking. "My father is going to get you to pay for this," he cried, running off and shouting to find his wealthy dad. This was time and the very last time I had seen Bruno Jenkins until now. I doubted very much that he was about to be turned into a mouse. although I must confess that I was secretly hoping it might happen. Either way, I didn't envy him for being up there in front of all those witches. "Darling boy," cooed the Grand High Witch from up on the platform, "I have your chocolates all ready for you. Do come up here first and say hello to these lovely ladies." Her voice was quite different now. It was soft and gentle and absolutely dripping with syrup. Bruno, looking bewildered, but he allowed himself to be led up to the platform, where he stood beside the Grand High Witch and said, "Okay, where are my 6 chocolate bars?" I saw the witch who had led him quietly putting the chain back on the door bells and on the door handles. Bruno didn't notice this. He was too busy asking for the witch. "This time is now 1 minute before 3:30, announced the Grand High Witch. "What's going on?" Bruno asked. He wasn't frightened, but he also wasn't looking exactly comfortable. "What is this?" he said. "Give me any chocolate. Any." 30 seconds to go," cried the Grand High Witch, gripping Bruno by the arm. Bruno, who was standing up there, cleared himself, was shook, and stared at her. She stared back at him, smiling with the lips of a mask. Every witch in the audience was staring at Bruno. 20 seconds, cried the Grand High Witch. "Give me the chocolate," shouted Bruno, coming super suspiciously. "Give me that chocolate and let me out of here." 50 seconds to go, cried the Grand High Witch. "Will one of you crazy spunks kindly tell me what all this is about?" shouted Bruno. 10 seconds, cried the Grand High Witch. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have ignition. I could have sworn I had an alarm clock ringing. I saw Bruno jump. He jumped as though someone had stuck a hat pin deep into his bottom and yelled, "Ow!" He jumped up and then he landed on a small table up there on the stage, and he started hopping about on the top of the table, waving his arms and yelling on his head. Then suddenly he became silent. His whole body stiffened. "The alarm has gone off!" shrieked the Grand High Witch. "The mask maker is beginning to work." She started hopping around the platform and clapping her gloved hands together, and then shouted out, "The smelly brat, this filthy scum, this hot little mouse will very, very soon become a lovely little mouse." Bruno was getting smaller by the second. I could see him shrinking, but his clothes were seeming to disappear, and brown spurs were growing all over his body. Suddenly, he had a tail, and he had whiskers, he had 4 feet, and it was all happening so quickly. It was a matter of seconds, and only, all at once, he wasn't there anymore. A small brown mouse was running around on the tabletop. "Bravo!" yelled the audience. "She's done it! It works! It's fantastic! It's colossal! It's the greatest yet! You are a miracle, brainy one." They were all standing up there high, and clapping and cheering, and the Grand High Witch produced a mouse trap from the folds of her dress and started to set it. "Oh no," I thought. "I don't want to see this. Bruno Jenkins might have been a bit of a stinker, but I'm dashed off, and I want to watch him having his head chopped off." "Where is he?" snapped the Grand High Witch, screeching the platform. "Where's that mouse got to?" She couldn't find him. Clever Bruno must have jumped up down the table and scampered off into the same corner of some hole in the corner of a wall. "Thank heavens for that. It matters not," shouted the Grand High Witch. "Silence, and it is now done. Everybody, sit down." The Grand High Witch stood on the very center of the platform, and those dangerous eyes of hers traveled slowly around the audience of witches who were sitting meekly before her. "All those over 70, put up your hands," she barked suddenly. 7 or 8 hands went up in the air. "It comes to me," said the Grand High Witch, "that you ancient ones will not be able to climb the high trees in such a gruntle's eggs." "We won't, your Grand Highness. You're afraid we won't," taunted the ancient ones. "Nor will you be able to catch the grabble cruncher who lives high in the rocky cliffs," the Grand Witch went on. "I can't exactly see you sprinting after the speedy cat springer either, or diving into deep waters to spare the blabbersnitch, or struggling through the bleak moors with a gun under your arm to shoot the globber squirt. You're too old and feeble for those things." "We are," chanted the ancient ones. "We are, we are. You ancient ones have served me well over many years, and the Grand High Witch, I do not wish to deny your pleasure of bumping off a few thousand children, each just because you have become old and feeble. I have therefore prepared personally, with my own hand, a limited quantity of delayed action mouse maker, which I will distribute to the ancient ones before you leave the hotel." "Oh, thank you, cried the old witches. "You are far too good to us, your grandness. You are so kind and thoughtful. Here's a sample of what I will give you," shouted the Grand High Witch. She finished around in the pocket of her dress and brought out a very small bottle. She held it up and shouted, "In this tiny bottle is 500 doses of mouse maker. It is enough to turn 500 children into mice. I could see that the water was made up of dark blue glass and it was very small, about the same size as the ones you can buy at the chemist with no nose drops in them. Each of you ancient ones will get 2 of these bottles, she shouted. Thank you, O most generous one, and thoughtful one, chorused the ancient witches. No 1 drop will be wasted. Each of us will promise to squish and scrub up and squiggle 1,000 Jujin. Our meeting is over, announced the Grand High Witch. There is a table for the remainder of your stay in the hotel. Right now, we will all go out and see the sun shine tears and have tea with the ridiculous manager. Next, at 6 o'clock tonight, these witches who are too old to climb the trees after gruntle eggs will report to my room to retrieve 2 bottles each of mouse maker. My room is number 454. Do not forget it. Then at 8 o'clock, all of you will assemble in the dining room for supper. We are lovely ladies of the RSPCC, and are setting up 2 long tables especially for us. But do not forget to put the cotton plugs up your noses. The dining room will be full of filthy little children, and without the nose plugs, the sink will be unbearable. Apart from that, remember to behave normally at all times. Is everything clear? Any questions? I have one question, Your Grandness, said a voice in the audience. What happens if one of the chocolates we are giving away in our shops gets eaten by a grown-up? That's just too bad for the grown-ups, said the Grand High Witch. This meeting is over, she shouted. Out you go! The witches stood up and began gathering their things. I was watching them through the crack and hoping to heaven they would hurry up and leave so that I might be safe. Wait! Shrieked one of the witches in the back row. Hold everything! Her shrieking voice echoed throughout the ballroom like a trumpet. All the witches suddenly stopped and turned and looked towards the speaker. She was one of the taller witches, and I could see her standing there with her head tilted back and her nose in the air. And she was sucking up in a great long breath, and she was sucking up in great long breaths of her air through those curvy pink seashell nostrils of her. Wait! She shouted again. What is it? The other cried. Dog droppings! She yelled. Just then, I got a whiff of dog droppings. Surely not, the others shouted. They couldn't be. Yes, shouted the first witch. There it is again. It's not strong, but it's here. I mean, it's here. It's definitely somewhere not too far. What's going on here? Shouted the Grand High Witch, glaring down from the platform. Mildred's just got a whiff of dog's droppings, Your Grandness. Someone called back to her. What rubbish is this? Shouted the Grand High Witch. She has dog droppings on the brain. There are no children in this room. Hang on, cried the witch called Mildred. Hang on, everybody. Don't move. I'm getting it again. Her huge curvy nostrils, waving in and out like a pair of fishtails, is getting stronger. It's hitting me harder now. Can the rest of you smell it? All the noses of all the witches in the room went up. And the air, all the nostrils began to suck and sniff. She's right, cried another voice. She's absolutely right. Dog dropping it is, strong and foul. In a matter of seconds, the entire assembly of witches had taken up the dreaded cry of dog droppings. Dog droppings, they shouted. The room is full of it. Pooh! Pooh! Why did we not smell it before? It stinks like a sewer. Some little swine must be hiding not so far, very far from here. Find it, screamed the Grand High Witch. Track it down, Riddle. Follow your noses till you get it. The hairs on my head were standing up like a bristle of nail brush, and a cold sweat was breaking out all over me. Root your way out! The small lump of dung, screeched the Grand High Witch. Don't let it escape. If it is in here, it has observed the most secret things. It must be exterminated immediately. I remember thinking to myself, there is no escape for me now. Even if I make a run for it and manage to dodge the lot of them, I still won't get out because the doors are chained and locked. I'm finished. I'm done for. Oh, Grandmama, what is going to happen to me? What are they going to do? I looked around and I saw the most hideous, painted and powdered witch's face staring down at me. And the face opened its mouth and yelled triumphantly. It's here! It's behind the screen! Come and get it! The witches reached out a gloved hand and grabbed me by the hair. But I twisted feet and jumped away. Oh, ran. Oh, how I ran. The sheer terror of it put wings on my feet. I flew around the outside of the great ballroom, and not one of them had a chance of catching me. As I came level with the doors, I pushed and tried to open them, but the big chain was on them, and they didn't even rattle. The witches would not bother to chase me. They simply stood there in small groups, watching me and knowing for certain that there was no way I could ever escape. Several of them were holding their noses with gloved fingers, and they cried, "Pooh! What a stink! We can't stand this much longer." "Catch it then, you idiot!" screamed the Grand High Witch from up the platform. spread out in a line across the room, and close on it, and grab it. Corner the filthy gum boil and seize it and bring it up here to me. The witches spread out as they were told. They advanced towards me, some from one end and some from the other, and some empty chairs came from the middle behind the rows of empty chairs. They were bound to get me. They had me cornered. From every sheer and absolute terror, I began to scream. "Help!" I screamed, turning my head towards the door in the hope that somebody outside might hear me. "Help! Get it!" shouted the Grand High Witch. "Grab him of it! Stop it yelling!" They rushed at me, and then about 5 of them grabbed me by the arms and legs and lifted me clear off the ground. I went on screaming, but one of them clapped a gloved hand over my mouth, and that stopped me. "Bring it here!" shouted the Grand High Witch. "Bring that spying little worm up here to me!" I was carried onto the platform with my arms and legs held tight by my hands, and I lay there suspended in the air facing the ceiling, and I saw the Grand High Witch standing over me, grinning at me in the most horrible way. She had held up the small blue bottle of mouse milk and said, "Now for a little medicine. Hold his nose to make him open his mouth." Strong fingers pinched my nose. I kept my mouth closed tight and held my breath, but I couldn't do it for long. My chest was bursting, and I opened my mouth to get one big quick breath, and as I did, the Grand High Witch poured the entire contents of that little bottle down my throat. Oh, the pain and the fire! I felt as though a kettle of boiling water had been poured down my throat. My throat was going in flames. Then very quickly, the frightful burning, searing, scorching feeling started spreading down into my chest and then my tummy and on into my arms and legs and all over my body. I screamed and screamed, but once again the gloved hand was clapped over my lips. The next thing I knew, I felt my skin beginning to tighten. How else could I describe it? It was quite literally a tightening and shrinking of the skin all over my body, from the top of my head to the tips of my fingers to the end of my toes. I felt as though I was a balloon, and somebody was twisting the top of the balloon, and twisting it, and it was getting smaller and smaller, and the skin was getting tighter and tighter, and soon it was going to burst. Then the squeezing began. This time I was inside a suit of iron, and somebody was turning a screw. With each turn of the screw, the iron suit became smaller and smaller, so that I was squeezed like an orange, pulpy mess, with the juice running out of my sides. After there came a piercing, prickling sensation all over my body, as though tiny needles were forcing their way out through the surface of my skin from the inside, and this I realized now was the growing of the mouse fur. Far away in the distance, I heard the voice of the Grand High Witch yelling, 500 doses! This stinking little comical had 500 doses, and the alarm clock had been smashed, and now we are having instantaneous action. I heard clapping and cheering, and I remember thinking, I am not myself any longer. I've gone clear out of my own skin. I noticed that the floor was only an inch away from my nose. I noticed also a pair of little furry front paws resting on the floor, and I was able to move those paws. They were mine. In that moment, I realized I was no longer a little boy, and I was a mouse. Now for the mouse trap, I heard the Grand High Witch. I've got it right here, and here's a piece of cheese. But I wasn't going to wait for that. I was off across the platform like a streak of lightning. I was astonished at my own speed. I let the witch's feet right and left, and in no time at all, I was down the steps and onto the floor of the bathroom itself, and squishing off the rows of chairs. What I especially liked was the fact that I could make no sound at all. I was a swift movement, silent mover, and quite amazingly, the pain had all gone now. I was feeling quite remarkable. Well, it's not a bad thing after all. I thought to myself to be tiny as well as speedy. When there's a bunch of dangerous females after you, I selected the back leg of a chair and squeezed up against it and kept very still. In the distance, the Grand High Witch was shouting, "Leave that little stink pot alone. It's not worth bothering about. It's only a mouse now. Somebody else will soon catch it. Let us get out of here. The meeting is over. Unlock the doors and jump to the Sunshine Terrace to have tea with that idiotic manager." I peeped around the legs of the chair and watched the hundreds of witches' feet walking around through the doors of the ballroom. When they had all gone and the place was absolutely silent, I began to move cautiously about the floor. Suddenly, I remembered Bruno. He must surely be around here somewhere. "Bruno!" I called out. I wasn't seriously expecting that I was able to speak at all now, and that I became a mouse. So I got the shock of my life when I heard my own voice, my own perfectly normal, rather loud voice, come out from my tiny little mouth. It was wonderful. I was thrilled. I tried again. "Bruno Jenkins, where are you?" I called out. "If you can hear me, give a shout." My voice was exactly the same, just as loud as it had been when I was a boy. Hey there, Bruno Jenkins, where are you? There was no answer. I pottered about between the seat legs, trying to get used to being so close to the ground. I decided I'd rather like it. You were probably wondering why I wasn't depressed at all. I found myself thinking, what's so wonderful about being a little boy anyway? Why is that necessary any better? Why is that necessarily any better than a mouse? I know that mice get hunted and sometimes get poisoned or caught in traps, but little boys sometimes get killed too. Little boys can be run over by motor cars, as they can die from some awful illnesses. Little boys have to go to school. Mice don't. Mice don't have to pass exams. Mice only have two enemies, humans and cats. My grandmother is a human, but I know for certain that she will always love me, whoever I am. And she never, thank goodness, keeps a cat. When mice grow up, they don't ever have to go to war and fight against other mice. Mice, I felt pretty certain, all like each other. People don't. Yes, I told myself. I don't think it is a bad thing to be a mouse at all. I was wandering around the ballroom, thinking about all this when I spotted another mouse. It was crouching on the floor, holding a piece of bread in its front paws and nibbling away with great gusto. It had to be Bruno. Hello, Bruno, I said. He glanced up at me and for 2 seconds, then went right on guzzling. What have you found? One of them dropped it, he answered. It's a fish paste sandwich. Pretty good. He too spoke with a perfectly normal voice. One would have expected that a mouse, if it was going to take it all, would do so with the smallest and squeakiest voice you could imagine. It was terrifically funny to hear the voice of the rather loud mouth, Bruno, coming out of this tiny mouse's throat. Listen, Bruno, I said. Now that we're both mice, I think we ought to stop thinking about the future. We should stop eating. And he stopped eating and stared at me with a small black eye. What do you mean, we? He said. The fact you're a mouse has nothing to do with me. But you're a mouse too, Bruno. Don't be a fool. I'm not a mouse. I'm afraid you are. I most certainly am not, he shouted. Why are you insulting me? I haven't been rude to you. Why do you call me a mouse? Do you know what's happened to you, I said. What on earth are you talking about, Bruno said. I have to inform you, I said. That's not very long ago. The witches turned you into a mouse. They did it to me. You're lying, he cried. I'm not a mouse. If you hadn't been so busy guzzling that sandwich, I said, you would have noticed your hairy paws. Take a look at them. Bruno looked down at the paws, and he jumped. Good grief. I am a mouse. You wait till my father hears about this. He may think it's an improvement, I said. I don't want to be a mouse, Bruno shouted, jumping up and down. I refuse to be a mouse. I said, you can live in a hole. I don't want to live in a hole, Bruno shouted. And you can creep into the larder at night, and I said, and nibble through all the packets of raisins and cornflakes and chocolate biscuits and everything else you can find. You can stay there all night eating yourself. Silly, that's what mice do. Now that's a thought, Bruno said, perking up a bit. But how am I going to open the door of the fridge to get at that cold chicken and all the leftovers? That's something I do every evening at home. Maybe your rich father will get you a special little mouse fridge all to yourself, I said. One that you can open. You say a witch did this to me, Bruno said. Which witch? The one who gave you the chocolate bar in the hotel lobby yesterday. I told him. Don't you remember? That filthy old cow, he shouted. I'll get for her this. Where is she? Who is she? Forget it, I said. You don't have hope. Your biggest problem at this moment is your parents. How are they going to take this? Will they treat you with sympathy and kindness? Bruno considered this for a moment. I think, he said, that my father's going to be a bit put out. And your mother? She's terrified of mice, Bruno said. Then you've got a problem, haven't you? Why only me? What about you? My grandmother will understand perfectly, I said. She knows all about witches. Bruno took another bite of his sandwich. What do you suggest? I suggest we go first of all and consult my grandmother. She will know exactly what to do. I moved towards the doors, which were standing open. Bruno was still gasping. Bruno, still grasping part of the sandwich in one paw, followed after me. When we get out of this corridor, I said, we're going to run like mad. Stick close to the wall all the way and follow me. Do not talk and do not let anyone see you. Don't forget, just about anyone who catches sight of you will try to kill you. I snatched the sandwich out of his paw and threw it away. Here goes, I said. Keep up behind me. As soon as I was out of the ballroom, I took off like a flash. I streaked down the corridor, went through the lounge and the reading room and the library and the drawing room, and came up to the stairs. Up the stairs, I went jumping quite easily from one to the other, keeping Roland against the wall all of the time. Are you with me, Bruno? I whispered. Right here, he said. My grandmother's room and my own were on the 5th floor. It was quite a climb, but we made it without meeting a single person on the way, because everyone was using the lift. On the 5th floor, I raced along the corridor to the door of my grandmother's room. A pair of her shoes was standing outside the door to the cleaned. A pair of her shoes was standing outside the door to be cleaned. Bruno was alongside me. What do we do now? Suddenly, I caught sight of a chambermaid coming along the corridor towards us. I saw at once that she was the one who had reported me to the manager for keeping white mice. Not, therefore, that sort of person I wanted to meet in my present condition. Quick! I said to Bruno. Hire one of these shoes! I hopped into one of the shoes, and Bruno hopped into the other. I waited for the maid to walk past. She didn't. When she came to the shoes, she bent down and picked them up. In doing this, she put her hands right inside the one I was hiding in. When one of her fingers touched me, I bit it. It was a silly thing to do, but I did it on instinct. Without thinking, the maid let out a scream that must have been heard by ships far in England, and she dropped the shoes and ran like the wind down the corridor. My grandmother's door opened. What on earth is going on out here? She said. I darted between her legs into her room, and Bruno followed me. Close the door, Grandmama! I cried. Please hurry! I looked round and saw two small brown mice on the carpet. Please close it, I said, and this time she actually saw me talking and recognized my voice. She froze and became absolutely motionless. Every part of her body, her fingers and hands and head became suddenly as stiff as a marble statue. Her face turned even paler than marble, and her eyes were stretched so wide I could see the witches all around them. I could see the whites all around them. Then she started to tremble. I thought she was going to faint and fall over. Please close the door quickly, Grandmama, I said. That awful maid might come in. She somehow managed to gather herself together enough to close the door. She leaned against it and staring down at me, white-faced and shaking all over. I saw the tears beginning to come out of her eyes and go dribbling down her cheeks. Don't cry, Grandmama. Things could be a lot worse. I did get away from them. I'm still alive. So is Bruno. Very slowly she bent down and picked me up with one hand. Then she picked up Bruno with the other and put us both on the table. There was a bowl of bananas in the center of the table, and Bruno jumped onto it and began tearing away with his teeth at one of the banana skins to get at the fruit inside. My grandma grasped me in one arm and one arm of her chair. Steadily, she herself never left her eyes off me. Sit down, Grandmama, I said. She collapsed into the chair. Oh, my darling, she murmured, and now the tears were really streaming down her cheeks. Oh, my poor sweet darling, what have they done to you? I know what they've done, Grandmama, and I know what I am, but the funny thing is, I don't honestly feel especially bad about it. I don't even feel angry. In fact, I feel rather good. I know I'm not a boy any longer, and I know I will never be. But I know that you always look after me. I was not just going to trying to console her. I was being absolutely honest the way I felt. You may think it is odd that I wasn't weeping myself. It was odd. I simply cannot explain it. Of course I'll look after you, my grandma murmured. Who is the other one? That's a boy called Bruno Jenkins, I told her. They got him first. My grandmother took a long, new black cigar out of the case in her handbag and put it into her mouth. Then she got out a box of matches. She struck a match, then her fingers were shaking so much that her flame kept on missing the end of the cigar. When she got it lit at last, she took a long pull and sucked into the smoke. Then that seemed to calm her down a bit. Where did it happen? She whispered. Where's the witch now? Is she in a hotel? Grandmama, I said. It wasn't just one. It was hundreds. They're all over the place. They're right here in the hotel at this very moment. She leaned forward and stared at me. You don't mean to tell me they're holding the annual meeting right here in this hotel? They've held it, Grandma. It's finished. I heard it all, and all of them, including the Grand High Witch herself, are downstairs now. They're pretending to be the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty of Children. They're all having tea with the manager. And they caught you? They smelt me out, I said. Dog droppings, was it? She said, sighing. I'm afraid so. But it wasn't strong. They very nearly didn't smell me because I hadn't bathed for ages. Children should never bathe, my grandma said. It's a dangerous habit. I agree, my grandma. She paused, sucking at her cigar. Do you really mean to tell me that they are now all downstairs having tea? She said. I'm certain of it, Grandma. There was another pause. I could see the old glint of excitement slowly coming back into my grandma's eyes, and all of a sudden she sat up that very moment in her chair and said sharply, Tell me everything right from the beginning, and please hurry. I took a deep breath and began to talk. I told her about going to the ballroom, hiding behind the screen to do my mouse training. I told her a notice saying Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. I told her all about the woman coming in and sitting down, and about the small woman who appeared on stage and took off her mask. but when it came to describing what her face looked like underneath the mask, I simply couldn't find the right words. It was horrible, Grandmama, I said. Oh, it was horrible. It was like something that was going rotten. Go on, Grandma said, don't stop. Then I told her about all the other things, all the others taking off their wigs and their gloves and their shoes, and how I saw before me a sea of bold, pimpy heads, and how the woman's fingers had claws, and how their feet had no toes. My grandma had come forth now in her armchair, so that she was sitting right on the edge. Both her arms and hands were cupped over the gold knob of the stick that she always used when walking. And she was staring at me with eyes as bright as 2 stars. Then I told her how the Grand Haired Witch had shot out the fiery white hot sparks, and how they had turned one of the other witches into a puff of smoke. I've heard about that, my grandma cried out excitedly, but I never quite believed it. You're the first non-witch to ever see it happen. It is the Grand Haired Witch's most famous punishment. It is known as getting fried, and all the other witches are petrified of having it done to them. I am told that the Grand Haired Witch makes it a rule to fry at least one witch at every annual meeting she does. She does it in order to keep the rest of them on their toes. Don't they? But they don't have any toes, Grandmama. I know they don't, my darling. Please go on. So then I told my grandmother about the delayed action mouse maker, and when I came to the bit about turning all the children into mice, she actually leapt out of their chair shouting, I knew it! I knew they were brewing out something tremendous. We've got to stop them, I said. She turned and stared at me. You can't stop witches, she said. Just look at the power that terrible Grand Haired Witch has in her eyes alone. She could kill any of us at any time with those white hot sparks of hers. You saw it herself. Even so, Grandma, we've still got plenty of time to stop them from turning all the children into mice. You haven't quite finished, she said. Tell me about Bruno. How did they get him? So I described Bruno Jenkins had come in and how they had actually seen him with my own eyes being shrunk into a mouse. My grandma looked at Bruno, who was guzzling away at the bowl of bananas. Does he ever stop eating? She asked. Never, I said. Can you explain something to me, Grandma? I'll try, she said. She reached out and lifted me off the table and put me on her lap. Very gently, she began stroking the soft fur of my back. It felt nice. What is it you want to ask me, my darling? The thing I don't understand, I said, is how Bruno and I are still able to talk and think just as we did before. It's quite simple, my grandma said. All they've done is shrink you and give you 4 legs and a furry coat, but they haven't been able to change you into a 100% mouse. You're still yourself in every aspect, but your appearance. You've still got your own mind and your own brain and your own voice, and thank goodness for that. So I'm not really an ordinary mouse at all. I'm sort of a mouse person. Quite right, she said. You're a human in a mouse's clothing. You are very special. We sat there in silence for a few moments while my grandmother went on stroking me very gently with one finger and puffing her cigar with the other. The only sound in the room was made by Bruno as he attacked the bananas in the bowl. But I wasn't doing nothing as I lay there on her lap. I was thinking like mad. My brain was whizzing as it had never. Before Grandma, I said, I may have had a bit of an idea. Yes, my darling, what is it? The Grand Haired Witch told them her room was number 454, right? Right, she said. Well, my room number is 554. Mine is 554. Mine is on the 5th floor, so hers, 454, will be on the 4th floor. That is correct, my grandma said. Then don't you think it's possible that the room 454 is directly underneath 554? That's more than likely, she said. These modern hotels are built like boxes of bricks. But what if it is? Would you please take me out to the balcony so I can look down, I said. All the rooms in the hotel had a small private balcony. My grandma carried me through into my own bedroom and out onto the balcony. We both peered down to the balcony immediately. Now, if that is her room, I said, then I'll bet I could climb down there and somehow get it. And get caught all over again, my grandma said. I wouldn't allow it. At this moment, I said, all the witches are down on the Sunshine Terrace having tea with my manager. The Grand Haired Witch probably won't be back until 6 o'clock or just before. That's when she's going to dish out supplies of that foul formula to the ancient ones who are too old to climb trees after gruntle eggs. And what if you did manage to get into her room? My grandma said. What then? Then I should try to find the place where she keeps a supply of delayed action mouse maker. And if I succeed, I would steal 1 bottle of it and bring it back here. Could you carry it? I think so, I said. It's a very small bottle. I'm frightened of that stuff, my grandma said. What would you do? What if you did manage to get it? 1 bottle is enough for 500 people, I said. That would give each and every witch down there at least double dose at least. We would turn them all into mice. My grandma jumped out about an inch into the air, and we were out on the balcony, and there was a drop of about 1,000,000 feet below us. And I very nearly bounced out of her hand over the railings when she jumped. Be careful with me, Grandma, I said. What an idea, she cried. It's fantastic. It's tremendous. You're a genius, my darling. Wouldn't it be something, I said. Wouldn't that really be something? We'll get rid of every witch in England in one swoop, she cried. And that grandha witch into the and the grandha witch into the bargain. We've got to try it, I said. Listen, she said, nearly dropping me over the balcony once again in excitement. If we brought this off, it would be the greatest triumph in the whole history of witchery. There's a lot of work to do, I said. Of course there's a lot of work to do, she said. Just for a start, suppose she did manage to get a hold of the action mouse maker. What are you gonna do to get it into their food? Well, we'll work that out later. Let's give it a try first. How can we find out for sure if that's her room just below us? We shall check it out immediately. My grandmother cried. Come along. There's not a second to waste. Carrying me in one hand, she went bustling out of the room and corridor, banging her stick on the carpet with each step she took. We went downstairs, one flight to the floor, then the bedrooms on the other on the side of the corridor had their numbers painted on the doors in gold. Here it is, my grandma cried. Number 454. She tried the door. It was locked, of course. She looked up and down the empty room hotel corridor. I do believe you're right, she said. This room is almost certainly directly below yours. She marched back along the door, counting the number of doors from the grandha witch's room to the staircase. There were 6. She climbed back to the 5th floor and repeated the exercise. She is directly below you, her grandma cried. Her room is right below yours. She carried me back into my own bedroom and went out once again to the balcony. That's her balcony down there, she said. And what's more, the door from her balcony to the bedroom is wide open. How are you going to climb down? I don't know, I said. Our rooms were in front of the hotel, and I looked down on the beach. Immediately below the balcony, thousands of feet below, I could see a fence of spiked railings. If I fell, I'd be goner. I've got it, my grandma said. With me in her hand, she rushed down back into her own room and began rummaging in the chest of drawers. She came out with a ball of blue knitting wool. One end of it was attached to some needles and a half-finished sock she had been knitting for me. This is perfect, she said. I shall put you in the sock and lower you onto the ground. The grandha witch's balcony, which is below you, but we must hurry. Any moment now, the monster will be returning to her room. My grandma hustled me back into my own bedroom and out onto the balcony. Are you ready? She asked. I'm going to put you in the sock now. I hope I can manage this, I said. I'm only a little mouse. You'll manage, she said. Good luck, my darling. She popped me into the sock and started lowering me over the balcony. I crouched inside the sock and held my breath. Through the stitches, I could see out quite clearly miles. Miles below me, the children playing on the beach were the size of beetles. The sock started swinging in the breeze. I looked up and saw my grandmother's head sticking out over the rails of the balcony. You're nearly there, she called out. Here we go. Gently does it. You're down. I felt a slight bump. In you go, my grandmother was shouting. Hurry, hurry, hurry up! Search for the room. I jumped out of the sock and ran into the grandha witch's bedroom. There was the same musty smell about the place that I noticed in the ballroom. It was the stench of a witch. It reminded me of the smell inside the men's public laboratory at our local railway station. As far as I could see, the room was tidy enough. There was no sign of anywhere that was inhabited by any normal person. But then there wouldn't be any problem, would there? No witch would be stupid enough to leave anything suspicious lying around for the hotel maid to see. Suddenly, I saw a frog jumping across the carpet and disappearing under the bed. I jumped myself. Hurry up, called my grandmother's voice. Voice from somewhere high up outside. Grab the stuff and get out. I started skittering around, trying to search for the room. This wasn't easy. I couldn't, for example, open any of the drawers. I couldn't open the doors of the big wardrobe either. I stopped skittering around. I sat in the middle of the floor and had to think. And the grandha witch wanted to hide something top secret. Where would she put it? Certainly not in any ordinary drawer. Not in the wardrobe either. It was too obvious. I jumped up onto the bed and got a better view of the room. Hey, I thought. What about another mattress? Very carefully, I lowered the mattress. I lowered myself over the edge of the bed and wormed myself underneath the mattress. I had to push myself hard to make any headway, but I kept at it. I couldn't see anything. I was scrambling under the mattress when my head suddenly bumped against something inside the mattress above me. I reached up and felt it with my paws. Could it be a little bottle? It was a little bottle. I could trace the shape of it through the cloth of the mattress, and right alongside it, I felt another hard jump. And another and another. The Groundhog Witch must have slit open the mattress and put all the bottles inside and sewn up all again. I began tearing away frantically at the mattress, clothing cloth above my head with my teeth. My front teeth were extremely sharp, and it didn't take me long to make a small hole. I climbed into the hole and grabbed the bottle by the neck. I pushed it down through the hole in the mattress and climbed out after it. Walking backwards and dragging the bottle behind me, I managed to reach the edge of the mattress. I rolled the bottle off the bed and onto the carpet. It bounced, but it didn't break. I jumped down off the bed. I examined the little bottle. It was identical to the one the Groundhog Witch had in the ballroom. There was a label on it, Formula 86. It said, Delayed Action Mouse Maker. Then, it said, this bottle contains 500 doses. I felt tremendously pleased with myself. 3 frogs came hopping out of under the bed. They crouched out of the carpet, staring at me with large black eyes. I stared back at them. Those huge eyes were the saddest things I had ever seen. It suddenly occurred to me that almost certainly, once upon a time, there had been children. These frogs, before the Groundhog Witch had got hold of them. I stood there clutching the bottle and staring at the frogs. Who are you? I asked them. At that exact moment, I heard a key turning the lock of the door, and the door burst open and the Groundhog Witch swept into the room. The frogs jumped underneath the bed again, and in one quick hop, I darted after them, still clutching the bottle, and I ran back up against the wall, squeezing it hard. I heard feet walking on the carpet. I peeked round the bedpost. The 3 frogs were clustered together under the middle of the bed. Frogs cannot hide like mice. They cannot jump like mice. They cannot run like them. All they can do, poor things, is hop about rather clumsily. Suddenly the Groundhog Witch's face came into view, peering under the bed. I popped my head back behind the bedpost. So there you are, my little froggies, I heard her say. You can stay where you are until I go to bed tonight, and I shall throw you out the window and the seagulls can have you for supper. Suddenly, very loud and clear, there came the sound of my grandmother's voice through the open balcony. Hurry up, my darling, it shouted. Do hurry up. You'd better come out quickly. Who was calling? Snapped the Groundhog Witch. I peeped round the bedpost again and saw her walking across the room to the balcony door. Who is this on my balcony? She muttered. Who is it? Who dares to trespass on my balcony? She went through the door and onto the balcony itself. What is knitting wool hanging down here? I heard her say. Oh, hello, called my grandmother. I just dropped my knitting over the balcony by mistake. But it's all right. I've got hold of one end of it. I can pull up by myself. Thank you all the same. I marveled at the coolness of her voice. Who were you talking to just now? Snapped the Groundhog Witch. Who were you telling to hurry up and come out quickly? I was talking to my little grandson, I heard my grandmother saying. He's been in the bathroom for hours and it's time he came out. He's sitting there reading books and he forgets completely where he is. Do you have any children, my dear? I do not, shouted the Groundhog Witch, and she came quickly back into the bedroom, slamming the balcony door behind her. I was cooked. My escape route was closed. I was shut up in the room with the Groundhog Witch and these terrified frogs. I was just as terrified as the frogs. I was quite sure that if I was just spotted, I would be caught and thrown over the balcony and for the seagulls. There came a knock on the bedroom door. What is it this done? Said the Groundhog Witch. It is us, the ancient ones, said a meek voice from behind the doors. It is 6 o'clock, and we have come to collect the bottles you promised us, O your grandness. I saw her opening and crossing the carpet towards the door. The door was open, and then I saw a whole lot of feet, shoes beginning to enter the room. They were coming in slowly, as though the owners of those shoes were frightened of entering. Come in, snapped the Groundhog Witch. Do not stand out there dithering in the corridor. I don't have all night. I saw my chance. I jumped out from behind the doorpost and ran like lightning towards the open door. I jumped over several pairs of shoes on the way, and in 3 seconds I was out the corridor, still clutching the precious bottle to my chest. No one had seen me. There were no shouts of mouse. All I could hear were the voices of the ancient ones burbling through the silly sentences about how kind your grandness is, and all the rest of it. I was scampering down the corridor to the stairs up one flight when I went to the 5th floor, and then along the corridor again until I came to the door of my own bedroom. Thank goodness there was no one inside. Using the bottom of the little bottle, I began tapping and tapping the door. Tap, tap, tap. Would my grandmother hear me? I thought that she must. The bottle made quite a loud tap each time it struck. Just so long as nobody came along the corridor. But the door didn't open. I decided to take a risk. "Grandma!" I shouted as loudly as possible. "Grandma, let me in, let me in!" I heard her feet coming across the carpet and the door opened. I went in like an arrow. "I've done it!" I cried, jumping up and down. "I've got it, Grandma! Look, here it is! I've got a whole bottle of it." She closed the door. She bent down and picked me up. "Oh, my darling!" she cried. "Thanks heaven you're safe." She took the little bottle from me and read the bottle aloud. "Formula 86, delayed action mouse maker," she read. "This bottle contains 500 doses. You brilliant darling boy. You're a wonder, you're a marvel. How on earth did you get out of the room?" "I nipped out when the ancient ones were coming in," I told her. It was all a bit hairy, Grandmama. I wouldn't want to do it again." "I saw her too, my Grandma." "I know you did, Grandma. I heard you talking to each other. Don't you think she was absolutely foul?" "She's a murderer," my Grandma said. "She's the most evil woman in the world. Did you see her mask?" I said. "It's amazing," my Grandma said. "It looks just like a real face. Even though I knew it was a mask, I still couldn't tell." "Oh, my darling," she cried, giving me a hug. "I thought I'd never see you again. I'm so happy you got away." My grandmother carried me back into her own bedroom and put me on the table. She set the precious bottle down beside me. "What time are those witches having supper in the dining room?" she said. 8 o'clock, I said. She looked at her watch. "It's now 6:10. She said. "We've got until 8 o'clock to work out our next move." Suddenly her eye fell upon Bruno. He was still in the banana bowl on the table. He had eaten 3 bananas and I was attacking a 4th. He had become immensely fat. "That's quite enough," my grandma said, lifting him out of the bowl and putting him on the tabletop. "I think it's time we return you, this fellow, to the bosom of his family. Don't you agree, Bruno?" Bruno scolded at her. I had never seen a mouse scowl before, but he managed it. "My parents let me eat as much as I want," he said. "I'd rather be with them than with you." "Of course you would," my grandma said. "Do you know where your parents might be at this moment?" "They were in the lounge not so long ago," I said. "I saw them sitting there as we dashed on our way up here." "Right," my grandma said. "Let's go and see if they're still there." "Do you want to come along?" she added, looking at me. "Yes, please," I said. "I shall put you both in my handbag," she said. "Keep quiet and stay out of sight. If you must peep out now and again, don't show more than your nose." Her handbag was a large, bulky, black leather affair with a tortoiseshell clasp. She picked up Bruno and me and popped us into it. "I shall leave the clasp undone," she said, "but be sure to keep out of sight." I had no intention of keeping out of sight. I wanted to see everything myself. I seated myself in a little side pocket inside the bag, near the clasp, and now from there I was able to poke my head out whenever I wanted to. "Hey," Bruno called out. "Give me the rest of that banana I was eating." "All right," my grandma said. "Anything to keep you quiet." She dropped the half-eaten banana into the bag and then slung the bag over her arm and marched out of the room and went thumping along the corridor with her walking stick. We went down into the lift to the ground floor and made our way through the reading room to the lounge, and there, sure enough, sat Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins in a couple of armchairs with a low, round, glass-covered table between them. There were several other groups in there as well, but the Jenkins were the only couple sitting alone. Mrs. Jenkins was reading a newspaper. Mrs. Jenkins was knitting something large and mustard-coloured. Only my nose and eyes were able to clasp the grandmother's handbag, but I had a super view. I could see anything. My grandmother, dressed in black lace, went thumping across the floors of the lounge and halted in front of the Jenkins table. "Are you Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins?" she asked. Mr. Jenkins looked over at her at the top of his newspaper and frowned. "Yes," he said. "I am Mr. Jenkins. What can I do for you, madam?" "I'm afraid I had some rather alarming news for you," she said. "It's about your son Bruno." "What about Bruno?" Mrs. Jenkins said. Mr. Jenkins looked up, but went on knitting. "What's that little blighter been up to now?" Mr. Jenkins asked. "Raiding the kitchen, I suppose." "It's a bit worse than that," my grandma said. "Do you think we might go somewhere more private where I can tell you?" "Private?" Mr. Jenkins said. "Why do you have to be private?" "This is not an easy thing for me to explain," my grandma said. "I'd really much rather have it if we all went to your room and sat down before I tell you any more." Mr. Jenkins lowered his paper. Mrs. Jenkins stopped knitting. "I don't want to go up to my room, madam," Mrs. Jenkins said. I'm quite comfortable here, thank you very much. He was a large, coarse man, and he wasn't used to being pushed around by anybody. Kindly state your business and then leave us alone, he added. He spoke as though he was addressing someone who was trying to sound him a vacuum cleaner at the back door. My poor grandmother, who had been doing her best to be as kind to them as possible, now began to bristle at a bit herself. We really can't talk in here, she said. There are too many people. This is rather delicate and a personal matter. I'll talk where I want to, madam, Mrs. Jenkins said. Come on now, out with it. If Bruno has broken a window or smashed your spectacles, then I'll pay for the damage. But I'm not budging out of the seat. One or two other groups in the room are beginning to stare at us now. Where's Bruno anyway, Mr. Jenkins said. Tell him to come here and see me. He's here already, my grandma said. He's in my handbag. She patted the big floppy leather bag with her walking stick. Well, what the heck do you mean is in your handbag, Mr. Jenkins said. Are you trying to be funny, Mrs. Jenkins said. Very prim. There's nothing funny about this, my grandma said. Your son has suffered a rather unfortunate mishap. He's always suffering mishaps, Mrs. Jenkins said. He's suffering from overeating, and then he suffers from wind. You should hear him after supper. He sounds like a brass band. But a good dose of castor oil soon puts him right again. Where's that little beggar? I've already told you, my grandmother said. He's in my handbag. But I do think it might be better if we went somewhere private before you meet him in this present state. This woman's mad, Mrs. Jenkins said. Tell her to go away. The plain fact is, my grandma said, your son Bruno has actually been rather drastically altered. Altered? Shouted Mrs. Jenkins. What the devil did you mean, altered? Go away, Mrs. Jenkins said. You silly old woman. I'm trying to tell you as gently as I possibly can that Bruno really is in my handbag, my grandmother said. My own grandson actually saw them doing it to him. Saw who doing what to him? For heaven's sake, shouted Mr. Jenkins. He had a black moustache which jumped up and down from when he shouted. Saw the witches turning him into a mouse, my grandma said. Call the manager, dear, Mrs. Jenkins said to her husband. Have this mad woman thrown out of the hotel. At this point, my grandmother's patience came to an end. She frisked around in her handbag and found Bruno. She lifted him out and dumped him onto the glass top table. Mrs. Jenkins took one look at that fat little brown mouse and was still chewing a bit of banana, and she let out a shriek that rattled the crystals on the chandelier. She sprang away off her chair, yelling, It's a mouse! Take it away! I can't stand the things! It's Bruno, my grandmother said. You nasty cheeky old woman, cried Mr. Jenkins. He started flapping his newspaper at Bruno, trying to sweep him off the table. My grandmother rushed forward and managed to grab hold of him before he was swept away. Mrs. Jenkins was still screaming off her head, and Mr. Jenkins was towering over us, and shouted, Get out of here! How dare you frighten my wife like that? Take your filthy mouse away this instant! Help! Screamed Mrs. Jenkins. Her face had gone the colour of underside of a fish. Well, I did my best, my grandma said, and with that she turned and sailed out of the room, carrying Bruno with her. When we got back to the bedroom, my grandmother took both me and Bruno out of her handbag and put us on the table. Why on earth didn't you speak up and tell your father you were you? She said to Bruno. Because I had a full mouth, Bruno said. He jumped straight back into the bowl of bananas and went on eating. What a very disagreeable little boy you are, my grandma said to him. Not a boy, I said. Mouse. Quite right, my darling, but we don't have time to worry about him at this moment. We have to make plans about an hour and a half time. All the witches will be going down to supper in the dining room, right? Right, I said. And every one of them has got to be given a dose of mouse maker, she said. How on earth are we going to do that? Grandma said, I think you're forgetting that a mouse can go places where humans can't. That's quite right, she said. But even a mouse can't go creeping around on a tabletop like carrying a bottle and sprinkling mouse maker all over the witch's roast beef without being spotted. I wasn't thinking about doing it in a dining room, I said. Then where? In the kitchen, I said, while the food is being ready. My grandma stared at me. My darling child, she said slowly, I do believe that turning you into a mouse has doubled your brain power. A little mouse, I said, can go scuttling around the kitchen among the pots and pans, and if he's very careful, no one will ever see him. Brilliant, my grandma cried out. My golly, I think you've got it. The only thing is, I said, how will I know which food is theirs? I don't want to put it in the wrong saucepan. It might be disastrous if I turned all the other guests into mouse by mistake. And especially you, Grandma. Then you just have to creep into the kitchen and find a good hiding place and listen. Just lie there in some dark cranny listening to what the cooks are saying. And then with a bit of luck, somebody's going to give you a clue. Whenever they have a very big pantry to cook, whenever they have a big party to cook for, the food is always prepared separately. Right, I said. That's what I'll have to do. I shall wait there, and I shall listen, and shall hope for a bit of luck. It's going to be very dangerous, my grandma said. Nobody welcomes a mouse in the kitchen. If they see you, they're going to squash you to death. I won't let them see me, I said. Don't forget you'll be carrying the bottle, she said, so you won't be nearly as quick and nippy. I can run quite fast standing up with the bottle in my arms, I said. I did it just now, don't you remember? I came all the way from the Grand High Witch's room carrying it. What about unscrewing the top? She said. That might be difficult for you. Let me try. I said. I took hold of the little bottle and used both my paws. I found I was able to unscrew the cap quite easily. That's great, my grandma said. You really are a clever mouse. She glanced at her watch. At 7:30, she said, all shall go down to the dining room for supper with you in my handbag. I shall release you under the table together with the precious bottle, and from then on you'll be on your own. You'll have to work your way unseen across the dining room to the door that leads into the kitchen. There will be waiters going in and out of the door all the time. You will have to choose the right moment and nip in behind one of them for heaven's sake. Be sure you don't get trodden on or squeezed in the door. I'll try not to, I said. Whatever happens, you mustn't let them catch you. Don't go on about it, Grandma. You're making me nervous. You're a brave fellow, she said. I do love you. What about Bruno? Bruno looked up. I'm coming with you, he said, speaking with his mouth full of bananas. I'm not going to miss my supper. My grandma considered this for a moment. I'll let you tag along, if you promise to stay in my bag and keep absolutely silent. Will you keep passing food down from the table? Bruno asked. Yes, she said. If you promise to behave yourself. Would you like to eat something, my darling? She said to me. No, thank you, I said. I'm too excited to eat, and I've got to keep fit and frisky for this big job ahead. That's a big job, all right, my grandma said. You're never going to do a bigger one. The time has come, my grandmother said. The great moment has arrived. Are you ready, my darling? It was exactly 7:30. Bruno was in the bowl, finishing the 4th banana. Hang on, he said. Just a few more bites. No, my grandmother said. We've got to go. She picked him up and held him tight in her hand. She was very tense and nervous. I'd never seen her like that before. I'm going to put you both in my handbag now, she said. By the the clasp undone, she popped Bruno into first. I waited, clutching a little bottle to my chest. Now you, she said. She picked me up and gave me a sweet kiss on the nose. Good luck, my darling. Oh, by the way, you do realize you've got a tail, don't you? A what? A tail. A long, curly tail. I must say, that never occurred to me. I said, good gracious me. So I have. I can see it now, and actually move it. It is rather grand. Isn't it? I mention it only because it might come in useful when you're climbing about the kitchen, my grandmother said. You can curl it around and you can hook to things. You can swing on places and lower yourself to the ground from high places. I wish I'd known this before. I could have practiced using it. Too late now, my grandmother said. We've got to go. She popped me into a handbag with Bruno, and at once I took up my usual perch in the small side pocket so that I could poke my head out and see what was going on. My grandmother picked up her walking stick, and out she went into the corridor to the lift. There was no one in there with us as we got in. Listen, she said. I won't be able to talk to you much when we get in the dining room. If I do, people think I'm dotty, and I'm talking to myself. The lift reached the ground and stopped with a jerk. My grandmother walked out of it and crossed the lobby of the room, with gold decorations on the ceiling and big mirrors around the walls. The regular guests always had their tables reserved for them, and most of them were usually up in their places. Waiters were buzzing about all over the place carrying plates and dishes. Our table was a small one beside the right-hand wall. About halfway down the room, my grandmother made her way to sit and sat down. Peeping out of the handbag, I could see, in the very center of the room, 2 very long tables that were not yet occupied. Each of them carried a notice, fixed onto a sort of silver trick, and the notice said, reserved for members of the RSPCC. My grandmother looked towards the long tables, but said nothing. She unfolded her napkin and spread it all over the handbag of her lap. Her hand slid under the napkin and took hold of me gently. With the napkin covering me, she lifted me up close to her face and whispered, I'm about to put you on the floor under the table. The tablecloth reaches almost to the ground so no one will see you. Have you got hold of the bottle? Yes, I whispered. I'm ready, Grandma. Just then, a waiter in a black suit came and stood by a table. I could see his legs from under the napkin, and as soon as I heard his voice, I knew who he was. His name was William. Good evening, madam, he said to my grandma. Where's that little gentleman tonight? He's not feeling very well, my grandma said. He's staying in his room. I'm sorry to hear that, William said. His idea is green pea soup to start with, and for the main course, you have a choice of either grilled fillet or sole or roast lamb. Pea soup and lamb for me, please, my grandma said. But don't hurry it, William. I'm in no rush tonight. In fact, you can bring me a glass of dried sherry first. Of course, madam, William said, and he went away. My grandmother pretended she had dropped something, and as she bent down, she slid me out from under the napkin onto the floor under the table. Go, darling, go, she whispered. Then she straightened up again. I was on my way now. I was all alone. I stood clasping the little bottle. I knew exactly where the door into the kitchen was. I had to go about halfway down the enormous dining room to reach it. Here goes, I thought, and like a flash, I skittled out from under the table and made for the dining wall. I had no intention of getting across the dining room floor. It was far too risky. My plan was to cling closely to the skirt of the wall of the way around until I reached the kitchen door. I ran away. I don't think anyone saw me. They were all too busy eating. But to reach the door leading to the kitchen, I had to cross the main entrance to the dining room. I was just about to do this when in poured a great flood of females. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the bottle. At first, I saw only the shoes and ankles of these women who were surging in through the door. When I glanced up a bit higher, I knew at once who they were. They were the witches coming in to dinner. I waited until they had all passed by me. Then I dashed on towards the kitchen door. I waited to open it to go in. I nipped in after him and hid behind a big garbage bin on the floor. I stayed there for several minutes, just listening to all of them and the racket. My golly, what a place the kitchen was. The noise and the steam and the clatter of pots and pans. And the cooks all shouting. And the waiters all rushing in from the dining room, yelling the food orders to the cooks. 4 soups and 2 lambs, 2 fish for table 28, 3 apple pies and 2 strawberry ice creams for number 17. Stuff like that was going on all the time. Not far above my head, there was a handle sticking out from the side of the garbage bin. Still clutching the bottle, I gave a leap, turning the somersault in the air and caught hold of the handle with my end of my tail. Suddenly, there I was swinging to a throw upside down. I was terrific. I loved it. This, I told myself, is how I, trapezed, an artist in a circus, must feel as he goes swishing through the air high up in the circus tent. The only difference was that his trapeze could only swing backwards and forwards. My trapeze could swing me in any direction I wanted. Perhaps I would become a circus master after all. Just then a waiter came in with a plate on his hand and heard him saying, "The old hag on table 14 says this meat is too tough. She wants another portion." One of the cooks said, "Give me her plate." I dropped to the floor and peeped round the garbage bin. I saw the cook scrape the meat off the plate and slap another bit on. And he said, "Come on, boys, give us some gravy." He carried the plate round to the kitchen on the end, and do you know what he did? Every one of those cooks and kitchen boys spat onto the old lady's plate. "See how she likes it now," said the cook, handing the plate back to the waiter. Quite soon enough, the waiter came in and shouted, "Everyone in the big eyes PCC wants the soup." That's when I started sitting up and taking notice. I was all ears now. I edged a bit further around the garbage bin so that I could see everything that was going on in the kitchen. A man with a tall white hat, who must have been on the head chef, shouted, "Put the soup for the big party in the largest silver soup tureen." I saw the head chef place a huge silver basin onto the wooden side bench and ran along the whole length of the kitchen against the opposite wall until the silver basin is where the soup is going, I told myself. So that's where the stuff in my little bowl must go as well. I noticed that high up near the ceiling above the side bench there was a long shelf crammed with saucepans and frying pans. If I can somehow climb up onto that shelf, I thought, then I've got it made. I shall be directly above the silver basin. But first I must somehow get across the other side of the kitchen and then up to the middle shelf again. A great idea came to me. Once again, I jumped up and hooked my tail around the hand of the garbage bin. Then hanging upside down, I began to swing, higher and higher. I swung, I was remembering the trapeze artist in the circus I'd seen last Easter, and the way he had gone to the trapeze, swinging higher and higher and higher, and had let go and gone flying through the air. So just at that right moment, at the top of my swing, I let go with my tail and went soaring across the kitchen and made a perfect landing on the middle shelf. By golly, I thought what marvelous things a mouse can do, and I'm only a beginner. Now, no one had seen me. They were all far too busy with their pots and pans. From the middle shelf, I somehow managed to shinny up a little water pipe in the corner, and in no time at all, I was up on the top shelf, just under the ceiling amongst all the pans and the frying pans. I knew that no one could possibly see me up there. It was a superposition. and I began working my way along the shelf until I was directly above the big empty silver basin they were going to pour the soup into. I put down my bottle, I unscrewed the top and crept to the edge of the shelf and quickly poured what was in it straight into the silver basin below. The next moment, one of the cooks came along with a gigantic saucepan of steaming green hot soup and put the whole lot in the silver basin. Then a waiter arrived and carried the silver basin away. I had done it! Even if I never got back alive to my grandmother, the witches were still going to get the mouse maker. I left the empty bottles back behind a large saucepan and began working my way back along the top shelf. It was much easier to move without the bottle. I began using my tail more and more. I swung from the handle of one saucepan to the other, of another, all the way to the top shelf, which was far below the cooks and waiters. They were bustling about, and kettles were steaming, and pans were spluttering, and pots were boiling. I thought to myself, oh boy, this is the life. What a life! What fun is it to be a mouse doing an exciting job like this? I swung most marvelously from handle to handle, and I was enjoying myself so much, I completely forgot I was in the full view of anyone in the kitchen who might happen to glance upwards. What came next happened so quickly, I had no time to save myself. I heard a man's voice shouting, "A mouse! Look at that dirty mouse!" and caught a glimpse below me with a white-coated figure in a tall white hat. And then there was a flash of steel as a carving knife whizzed through the air, and there was a shot of pain in the end of my tail. And suddenly I was falling, head first towards the door. Even as I fell, I knew just what had happened. I knew the tip of my tail had been cut off and that I was about to crash. Everyone in the kitchen would go after me. "A mouse," they were shouting. "A mouse! A mouse! Catch it quick!" I hit the floor, jumped up and ran for my life. All around me there were big black boots going stamp, stamp, snap, and I dodged around them and ran as fast as I could. Hardly knowing what I was doing, wanting only a place to hide, I ran up to the trouser leg of one of the cooks and clung to his sock. "Hey," the cook shouted. "Jeepers creepers, he's gone up my trousers." "Hold on, boys, I'll get him this time." The man's hand began slapping at trouser leg, and now I was really going to get smashed if I didn't move quickly. There was only one way to go. That was up. I dug my claws into the hairy skin of this man's leg and scuttled all the ways up, higher and higher. Past the calf and past the knee, onto the thigh. Holy smoke, this man was yelling. It's going all the way up, it's going right up my leg. I heard shrieks of laughter coming from other cooks, but I can promise you I wasn't laughing myself. I was running for my life. The man's hands were slapping all around me, and he was jumping up and down as though I was standing on hot bricks. And I kept climbing, and I kept dodging, and very soon I reached the very top of the trouser legs. And there was nowhere else to go. "Help!" the man screamed. "It's in my knickers! It's running down my flaming knickers! Get it out! Somebody help me get it out!" "Take off your trousers, you silly bub!" someone else shouted. "Pull down your pants, we'll catch him!" I was in the middle of man's trousers now, in the place where the two trouser legs meet, and the zip begins. It was dark and awfully hot in there. I knew I had to keep going. I dashed onward and found the top of the trouser leg. I went down like greased lightning and came out of the bottom of it once again. I was on the floor. I heard the stupid cook still shouting, "It's in my trousers, get it out! Will someone please help me to get it out before it bites me?" I caught a flashing glimpse of the entire kitchen staff crowding around him and laughing their heads off, and nobody saw the little brown mouse as it flew across the floor and dived into a sea of potatoes. I burrowed myself among the dirty potatoes and held my breath. The cook must have started taking his trousers right off, because now they were shouting, "There's not in there! There's no mice in there, you silly twat!" "There was, I swear there was," the man was shouting back. "You've never had a mouse in your trousers. You don't know what it feels like." The fact that a tiny little creature like me had caused such a commotion amongst a bunch of grown-up men gave me a happy feeling. I couldn't help smiling in spite of the pain in my tail. I stayed there while I was sure they had forgotten me. Then I crept out of the potatoes and cautiously poked my tiny head over the edge of the potato sack. Once again, the kitchen was all a bustle, with cooks and waiters rushing around everywhere. I saw the waiter who had come in earlier from the complaint about the tough teeth coming again. "Hey boys," he shouted. I asked the old hag if the new bit of meat was any better, and she said it was perfectly delicious. She said it was delicious. I had to get out of the kitchen and back to my grandmother. There was only one way to do this. I made a dash clear across the floor and out through the door behind one of the waiters. I stayed quite still, watching for my chance. My tail was hurt. I curled around it so it had to have it look at. About 2 inches of it was missing, and I was bleeding quite a lot. There was a waiter loading up with a batch full of plates full of pink ice cream. He had a plate in each hand and 2 more balanced on each arm. He went towards the door. He pushed it open with his shoulders. I leapt out of the sack of potatoes and went across the kitchen floor into the dining room like a streak of lightning. And I didn't stop until I was underneath my grandmother's table. It was lovely to see my grandmother's feet again, in their old-fashioned black shoes with the straps and buttons. I shimmied up one of her legs and landed on her lap. "Hello, Grandma," I whispered. "I'm back. I did it. I poured it all in the soup." Her hand came down and caressed me. "Well done, my darling," she whispered back. "Well done, you." They, at this very moment, are eating soup. Suddenly she withdrew her hand. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "My darling, what's happened to you?" "One of the cooks cut off my tail with a carving knife," I whispered. "It hurts like Billy-O." "Let me look at it," she said. She bent her head and examined my tail. "Poor little thing," she whispered. "I'm going to bandage it up with my handkerchief. This will stop the bleeding." She finished a small lace edge handkerchief out of her bag, and this was how she managed to wrap around the edge of my tail. "You'll be all right now," she said. "Just try to forget about it." "Did you really manage to pour the whole bottle into the soup?" "Every drop," I said. "Do you think you put me where I can watch them?" "Yes," she said. "My handbag is on your own empty chair beside me. I'm going to pop you in there now, and you can peep out as long as you are careful not to be seen. Bruno's in there as well, but take no notice of him. I gave him a roll to eat, and that's keeping him quiet for a while now." Her hand closed around me, and I was lifted off her lap and transferred to the handbag. "Hello, Bruno," I said. "This is a great roll," he said, nibbling away in the bottom of the bag. "But I wish there was butter on it." I peered over the top of the handbag. I could see the witches quite clearly sitting at their two long tables in the center of their room. They had finished their soup, and now the waiters were cleaning away the plates. My grandmother had lit up one of their disgusting black cigars and was puffing smoke everywhere. All around us, the summer holiday guests in his rather grand hotel were babbling away and tucking into their walking sticks. But there was also plenty of families with a husband and wife and several children. They were all well-to-do people. You had to be if you wanted to stay in the Hotel Magnificent. "That's her, Grandma," I whispered. "That's the Grand High Witch." "I know," my grandma whispered back. She's the tiny one in black sitting at the head of the nearest table. She could kill you," I whispered. "She could kill anyone in this room with her hot white sparks." "Look out," my grandma said. "The waiter's coming." I popped down out of the sight, and I heard William saying, "Your roast lamb, madam. And which vegetable pea would you like? Peas or carrots?" "Carrots, please," my grandma said, "but no potatoes." As the carrots being dished out, there was a pause. Then my grandma's voice was whispering, "It's all right. He's gone." I popped my head up again. "Surely no one would notice my little head sticking out like this," I whispered. "No," she said. "I don't suppose they will. My problem is I've got to talk to you without moving my lips." "You're doing it beautifully," I said. "I've counted the witches," she said. "There aren't nearly as many as you thought. You were just guessing, weren't you, when you just said 200? It just seemed like 200, I said. "I was wrong too," my grandma said. "I thought there were a lot more witches than this in England." "How many are there?" I asked. 84. "There were 84, I said. But one of them got fried." At that moment, I caught sight of Mr. Jenkins, Bruno's father, heading straight for our table. "Look out, Grandmama," I whispered. "Here comes Bruno's father." Mr. Jenkins striding up to our table with a very purposeful look on his face. "Where's that grandson of yours?" he said to my grandma. He spoke rudely and looked very angry. My grandma put her frostiest look and didn't answer him. "My guess is that he and my son Bruno are up to some devilment," Mr. Jenkins went on. "Bruno hasn't turned up for supper, and it takes a lot to make that boy miss his food. I must admit he has a very healthy appetite," my grandma said. "My feeling is that you're on this as well," Mr. Jenkins said. "I don't know who the devil you are, and I don't care much, but you played a nasty trick on my wife this afternoon. You put a dirty little mouse on the table. It makes me think all three of you are up to something. So if you know where Bruno's hiding, kindly tell me at once." "That was no trick I played on you," my grandmother said. "That mouse I tried to give you was your little own boy, Bruno. I was being kind to you. I was restoring him to the bosom of your family. You refused to take him in." "What the blazes do you mean, madam?" shouted Mr. Jenkins. "My son isn't a mouse." His black moustache was jumping up and down like a craze as he spoke. "Come on, woman, where is he? Out with it." The family at the table nearest to us all had stopped eating, and they were staring at Mr. Jenkins. My grandmother sat there puffing away calmly at her black cigar. I can well understand your anger, Mr. Jenkins," she said. "Any other English father would be just as cross as you are. But over in Norway, where I come from, we're quite used to these sort of happenings. We have learned to accept them as part of our everyday life." "You must be mad, woman," cried Mr. Jenkins. "Where is Bruno? If you don't tell me at once, I shall summon the police." "Bruno is a mouse," my grandma said, calm as ever. "He was most certainly not a mouse," shouted Mr. Jenkins. "Oh, yes, I am," Bruno said, poking his head out from the handbag. Mr. Jenkins leapt about 3 feet in the air. "Hello, Dad," Bruno said. He had a silly sort of mousy grin on his face. Mr. Jenkins' mouth dropped open so wide I could see the gold fillings in his black teeth. "Don't worry, Dad," Bruno went on. "It's not as bad as all that, just so long as the cat doesn't get me." Bruno, shouted Mr. Jenkins. No more school, said Bruno, grinning a broad and Asmund mouse grin. No more homework. I shall live in the kitchen cupboard and feast on raisins and honey. But Bruno, shouted Mr. Jenkins again. How did this happen? The poor man with no wind left in his sails at all. Witches, my grandma said. The witches did it. I can't have a mouse for a son, shrieked Mr. Jenkins. You've got one, my grandmother said. Be nice to him, Mr. Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins will go crazy, yelled Mr. Jenkins. She can't stand that things. So I just have to get used to him, my grandmother said. I hope you don't keep a cat in the house. We do, cried Mr. Jenkins. Topsy's my wife's favourite creature. Then you just have to get rid of Topsy's, my grandmother said. Your son is more important than your cat. He certainly is, Bruno shouted from inside the handbag. You told Mum she's got to get rid of Topsy before I go home. By now, half the dining room was watching our little group. Knives and forks and spoons had been put down. All of the place heads were turning round to stare at Mr. Jenkins as he stood, just spluttering and shouting. They couldn't see either Bruno or me, and they were wondering what all the fuss was about. By the way, my grandma said, would you like to know who did this to him? There was a mischievous little smile on his face, and I could see that she was about to get Mr. Jenkins into trouble. Who, he cried. Who did it? That woman over there, my grandma said. The small one in the black dress at the head of the long table. She's RSPCC, cried Jenkins. She's the chairwoman. No, she's not, my grandma said. She's the Grand High Witch of all the world. You mean she did it? The skinny little woman over there, cried Mr. Jenkins, pointing at her with a long finger. By gad, I'll have my lawyers onto her for this. I'll make her pay with the nose. I wouldn't do anything rash, my grandma said. That woman has magic powers. She might decide to turn you to something even sillier than a mouse. A cockroach, perhaps. Turn me into a cockroach, shouted Mr. Jenkins, puffing out his chest. I'd like to see her try. He swung around and started marching across the dining room towards the Grand High Witch's table. My grandmother and I watched him. Bruno had jumped onto our table and was also watching his father. Practically everyone in the dining room was watching Mr. Jenkins now. I stayed where I was, peeping out of my grandmother's handbag. I thought it might be wiser to stay put. Mr. Jenkins had not gone more than a few paces towards the Grand High Witch when a piercing scream rose above all the other noises in the room, and at that same moment, I saw the Grand High Witch going shooting up in the air. Now she was standing on her chair, still screaming. Now she was on top of the table, waving arms. What on earth's happening, Grandmama? Wait, my grandma said. Keep quiet and watch. Suddenly, all the witches, were more than 80 of them, were banging to screaming and jumping out of their seats as though spikes were being stuck into their bottoms. Some were standing on chairs, some were up on the tables, and all of them were wiggling about and waving their arms in the most extraordinary manner. Then all at once they became quiet. Then they stiffened. Every single one of them stood there as stiff and silent as a corpse. The whole room was becoming deathly still. They're shrinking, Grandma said. They're shrinking just like I did. I know, they're shrinking just like you did. I know they were, my grandma said. It's the mouse maker, I cried. Look, some of them are growing fur on their faces. Why is it working so quickly, Grandmama? I'll tell you why, Grandma said. Because all of them had a massive dose just like you. It's thrown the alarm clock right out of whack. Everyone in the dining room was standing up to get a better view. People were moving closer. They were beginning to crowd around the two long tables. My grandma lifted Bruno and me up so that we wouldn't miss any fun of it. In her excitement, she jumped into the chair so that she could see over the heads of the crowds. In another few seconds, all the witches had completely disappeared, and tops of the two long tables were swarming with brown mice. All over the dining room, women were screaming, and strong men were turning white in the face, shouting, "It's crazy! This can't happen! Let's get the heck out of here!" Waiters were attacking the mice with chairs and wine bottles and everything else that came to hand. I saw a chef in a tall white hat rushing out from the kitchen, brandishing a frying pan. And another one just behind him was wielding a carving knife above his head. And everyone was yelling, "Mice, mice, mice! We must get rid of this mice!" Only the children in the room were really enjoying it. They all seemed to know instinctively that something good was going on right here in front of them, and they were clapping and cheering and laughing like mad. "It's time to go," my grandma said. "Our work here is done." She got down off her chair and picked up her handbag and slung it over her arm. She had me in her right hand and Bruno in her left. "Bruno," she said, "the time has come to restore you to the most famous blossom of your family." "Your mom's not very crazy about mice," Bruno said. "My mom's not very crazy about mice," Bruno said, "so I noticed," my grandmother said. "She'll just have to get used to you, won't she?" It was not difficult to find Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins. You could hear Mrs. Jenkins' thrill voice all over the room. "Herbert!" it was screaming. "Herbert, get me out of here! There's mice everywhere. They'll go up my skirts." They had her arms around her husband, and from where I was, she seemed to be swinging from his neck. My grandmother advanced upon them and thrust Bruno into Mr. Jenkins' hands. "Here's your little boy," he said. "He needs to go on a diet." "Hi, Dad," Bruno said. "Hi, Mum." Mrs. Jenkins screamed even louder. louder. My grandmother, with me in her arm, turned and marched out of the room. She went straight across the hotel lobby and out through the front entrance in the open air. Outside, it was a lovely, warm evening, and I could even hear the waves breaking the beach just across the road from the taxi. Just across the road from the hotel. Is there a taxi here? My grandmother said to the tall doorman in his green uniform. Certainly, madam, he said, and he put his 2 fingers in his mouth and blew a long whistle. I heard him and watched him with envy. For weeks I had been trying to whistle like that, but I hadn't succeeded. Now I never would. The taxi came. The driver was an oldish man with a thick, black, drooping moustache. The moustache hung over his mouth like the roots of some plant. Where to, madam? He asked. Suddenly he caught sight of me, a little mouse nestling in the grandmother's hand. Blimey, he said. What's that? It's my grandson, my grandmother said. Drive us to the station, please. I always liked mice, the old taxi driver said. I used to keep hundreds of them when I was a boy. Mice are the fastest breeder in the world. Did you know that? So if he's your grandson, then I reckon you'll be having a few great grandsons to go with in a few couple of weeks' time. Drive us to the station, please, my grandma said, looking prim. Yes, ma'am, right away. My grandmother got in the back of the taxi and sat down and put me on her lap. Are we going home? I asked her. Yes, she answered. Back to Norway. Hooray! I cried. Oh, hooray, hooray, hooray! I thought you'd like that, she said. But what about our luggage? Who cares about luggage, she said. The taxi was driving through the streets of Birmingham, and this was the time of day when the pavements were crowded with holiday makers, all wandering away aimlessly with nothing to do. How are you feeling, my darling? My grandma said. Fine, I'm quite marvellous. She began stroking the fur of the back of my neck with one finger. We have accomplished great feats today, she said. It's been terrific. I said, absolutely terrific. It was lovely to be back in Norway once again in my grandmother's fine old house. But now that I was so small, everything looked different, and it took me quite a while to find my way around. Mine was a world of carpets and table legs and chair legs and little crannies behind little pieces of furniture. A closed door could not be opened and nothing could be reached that was on a table. But after a few days, my grandmother began to invent gadgets for me in order to live my life a bit easier. She got a carpenter to put together a number of slim, tall step ladders, and she placed one of these against each table in the house so that I would be able to climb up whenever I wanted to. She herself invented a wonderful door-opening device made out of wires and springs and pulleys, with heavy weights dangling on cords, and soon every door in the house had a door opener on it. All I had to do was press my front paws onto a tiny wooden platform, and hey, presto! A spring would stretch and weight would drop, and the door would next swing open. She rigged up an equally ingenious system where I would be able to switch on the light whenever I wanted. I cannot explain how it worked, because I knew nothing about electricity. But there was a little button let into the floor near the door in every room in the house, and when I pressed the button gently with one paw, the light would come on. When I pressed it a second time, the light would go off. My grandmother made me a tiny toothbrush using a matchstick for the handle, and into this she stuck little bits of bristle that she had snipped off one of her hairbrushes. You must not get any holes in this, she said. I can't take a mouse to a dentist. He'd think I was crazy. It's funny, I said, but I've never been such... It's funny, I said, but ever since I've become a mouse, I've hated the taste of sweets and chocolate, so I don't think I'll get any holes. You're still going to brush your teeth after every meal, my grandma said, and I did. For a bathtub, she gave me a silver sugar basin, and I bathed in it every night before going to bed. She allowed no one into the house, not even a servant or cook. We kept entirely to ourselves, and we were very happy in each other's company. One evening, as I lay on my grandmother's lap in the front of the fire, she said to me, I wonder what happened to that little Bruno. I wouldn't be surprised if his father gave him to the hall boarder to drown in the fire bucket, I answered. I'm afraid you might be right, my grandmother said. That poor little thing. We were silent for a few minutes, my grandmother puffing away at her black cigar while I dozed comfort oblige in warmth. Can I ask you something, Grandma? I said. Ask me anything you like, my darling. How long does the mouse live? Ah, she said. I've been waiting for you to ask me that. There was silence. He sat there smoking away and gazing at the fire. Wow, I said. How long do we live as mice? I have been reading about mice, he said. I've been trying to find out everything about them. Go on then, Grandma. Why don't you tell me? If you really want to know, she said. I'm afraid a mouse doesn't live for very long. How long? While an ordinary mouse only lives for about 3 years. But you are not an ordinary mouse. You are a mouse person. This is very different. How different? How long does a mouse person live, Grandma? Longer. Much longer. A mouse person will certainly live for 3 times as long as any ordinary mouse, my grandma said. About 9 years. Good, I cried. That's great. It's the best news I've ever heard. Why do you say that? She asked, surprised. Because I would never want to live any longer than you. I couldn't stand being looked after anybody else. There's a short silence. She had a way of finding me behind the ears, tips of one finger. It felt lovely. How old are you, Grandma? 86, she said. Will you live another 8 or 9 years? I might, she said, with a bit of luck. You've got to, I said. Because by then I'll be a very old mouse and you'll be a very old grandmother, and I'll soon after that we'll both die together. That'll be perfect, she said. I had a little doze after that. I just shut my eyes and thought of nothing and felt at peace with the world. Would you like me to tell you something about myself, about yourself that is very interesting, my grandmother said. Yes, please, Grandma, I said without opening my eyes. I couldn't believe it at first, but apparently it's quite true. What is it? The heart of a mouse, and that means your heart, is beating at the rate of 500 times a minute. Isn't that amazing? That's not possible, I said, opening my eyes wide. It's just true as I'm sitting here, she said. It's sort of a miracle. That's nearly 9 beats every second, I cried, working it out in my head. Correct, you are. Your heart is going so fast, it's impossible to hear the separate beats. All one hear is a soft humming sound. She was wearing a lace dress, and a lace kept tickling my nose. I had to rest my head on my front paws. Have you ever heard my heart humming away? My grandma asked. Often, she said. I hear it when you are lying very close to me on the pillow at night. The two of us remained silent in front of the fire for a long time after that, thinking about the wonderful things. My darling, she said at last, are you sure you don't mind being a mice for the rest of your life? I don't mind at all. It doesn't matter who you are or what you look like, so long as somebody loves you. For supper that evening, my grandma had a plain omelette with one slice of bread. I had a piece of brown Norwegian goat's milk, known as joist, which I had loved even when I was a little boy. We ate in front of the fire with my cheese on a small plate. Grandma, I said, now that we have done away with the Grandhound Witch, will all the other witches in the world gradually disappear? I'm quite sure they won't, she answered. I stopped chewing and stared at her. But they must, I cried. Surely they must. I'm afraid not, she said. But if she's not here any longer, how are they going to get all the money they need? And who's going to give them orders and jazz up the annual meetings and invent all the magic formulas for them? When a queen bee dies, there's always another queen in the hive ready to take her place. Queen Grandmother said, it's the same with witches. It's the great headquarters where the Grand High Witch lives. There's always another Grand High Witch waiting in the wings to take over if anything should happen. Oh no, I cried. This means everything we did was for nothing. Have I become a mouse for nothing too? We saved the children of England, she said. I don't call that nothing. I know, but it's not nearly good enough. I felt sure that all the witches of the world would slowly fade away after you got rid of the leader. Now you tell me that everything's going to just go on the same as before? Not exactly as before, my grandma said. For instance, there are no longer any witches in England. That's quite a triumph, isn't it? But what about the rest of the world, I cried. What about America and France and Holland and Germany? And what about Norway? You must not think I was sitting back and doing nothing for the last few days, she said. I have been doing a great deal of thought and time to think of that particular problem. I was looking up at her face when she said this, and all at once I noticed that a little secret smile was beginning to spread slowly around her eyes and corners of her mouth. Why are you smiling, Grandma? I asked her. I have some rather interesting news for you, she said. What news? Shall I tell you right from the beginning? Yes, please. I like good news. She had finished her omelette and I had enough of my cheese. She wiped her lips and with a napkin and said, as soon as we arrived back in Norway, I picked up the telephone and made a call to England. Who in England, Grandma? To the Chief of Police in Bournemouth, my darling. I told him I was the Chief of Police for the whole of Norway and I was interested in peculiar happenings that were happening recently in Hotel Magnificent. Now hang on, Grandma. There's no way an English policeman is going to believe that you're the head of the Norwegian police. I am very good at imitating a man's voice, she said. Of course he believed me. The police in Bournemouth was honoured to get a call from the Chief of Police for the whole of Norway. So what did you ask him? I asked him for the name and address of the lady who had been living in the room 454 in the Hotel Magnificent, the one who disappeared. You mean the Grand High Witch? I cried. Yes, my darling. Did he give it to you? Naturally, he did give it to me. One policeman will always help another. But golly, you've got a nerve, Grandmama. I wanted her address, my grandma said. But did he know her address? He did indeed. They found her passport in her room and her address was in it. It was in the hotel register. Everyone who stays in the hotel has to put a name and address in the book. But surely the Grand High Witch wouldn't have put a real name and address in the hotel register, I said. Why ever not, my grandma said. Nobody in the world had the faintest idea who she was, except the other witches. Wherever she went, people simply knew her as a nice lady. You, my darling, you alone were the only non-witch to ever see her with her mask off. Even in her home district and in the village where she lived, people knew her as a kindly and a very wealthy baroness who gave large sums of money to charity. I checked upon on that. I was getting excited now. And that address you got, Grandma? They must have been the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch. It still is, my grandmother said. And that will be where the Grand High Witch is certain. That will be where the new Grand High Witch is certain to be living at this very moment with her retinue of special assistant witches. Important rulers are always surrounded by large retinue of assistants. Where is her headquarters, Grandma? I said. Tell me quick, where is it? It is a castle, my grandmother said. And the fascinating thing is that in the castle will be all the names and addresses of all the witches in the world. How else could a Grand High Witch run her business? How else could she run the witches of the various countries to their annual meetings? Where's the castle, Grandmama? I cried, impatiently. Which country? Tell me quick. Guess, she said. Norway, I cried. Right, first time, she answered. High up in the mountains above a small village. That was thrilling news. I did a little dance of excitement on the top table. My grandmother was getting pretty worked up herself, and now she leaped herself out of her chair and began pouncing and pacing down the room, thumping on the carpet with her stick. So we have to go to work, you and I, she cried out. We have a great task ahead of us. Thank heavens you are a mouse. A mouse can go anywhere. All I'll have to do is put you down somewhere near the Grand High Witch's castle, and you can easily be able to get inside and creep inside looking and listening to everyone's heart's content. I will, I answered. No one will ever see me. Moving in the big castle will be one child's play, compared with going to a crowded kitchen full of cooks and waiters. You could spend days and days if necessary, my grandmother cried. In her excitement, she was waving her stick all around, and suddenly she knocked over a tall and very beautiful vase that went crashing to the floor and smashed into a million pieces. Forget it, she said. It's only a Ming. You could spend weeks in the castle if you wanted to, and they'll never know you were there. I myself would get a room in the village, and you could sneak out of the castle and have supper with every night and tell me what's going on. I could, I cried out. And inside the castle, I would go snooping around simply everywhere. But your main job, of course, my grandmother said, would be to destroy every witch in the place. That really would be the end of the whole organization. Me destroy them? How would I do that? Can't you guess, she said. Tell me, I said. Mouse maker, my grandma said. Formula 86 delayed action mouse maker all over again. You repeat it to everyone in the castle by putting drops into their food. You do remember the recipe, don't you? Every bit of it, I answered. You mean we're going to make it ourselves? Why not, she cried. If they can make it, so can we. It's just a question of knowing what goes into it. Who's going to climb up to the tall trees to get the Gruntle's egg? I think I'd better do that part of it, Grandma. You might be a cropper. Those are just details, she cried, moving her stick again. We shall let nothing stand in our way. And what happens after that? I asked it. After the new Grand High Witch and everyone in the castle had been turned to mice, then the castle will be completely empty, and I shall come in and join you and wait, I cried. Hold on, Grandma. I've just had a nasty thought. What nasty thought? When the mouse maker turned me into a mouse, I said. I didn't become just any ordinary mouse. Then you catch with mouse traps, I began, thinking intelligent mouse person wouldn't go near a mouse trap. My grandma stopped dead in her tracks. She already knew what was coming next. Therefore, I went on, if we use the mouse maker to turn the new Grand High Witch and all the other witches in the castle into mice, the whole place will be swarming with very clever, very nasty, very dangerous, thinking mouse witches. There will all be witches in mouse clothing, and I added, could be very horrible indeed. By golly, you're right, she cried. That never occurred to me. I couldn't possibly take on a castle full of mouse witches, I said. Nor could I, she said. They had to be got rid of at once. They had to be smashed and bashed and chopped into little pieces exactly as they were in the Hotel Magnificent. I'm not doing that, I said. I couldn't anyway. I don't think you could either, Grandma said. And mouse traps wouldn't be the slightest of use. By the way, I add, the Grand High Witch who did me in was wrong about mouse traps, wasn't she? Yes, my grandma said impatiently. But I'm not concerned with that Grand High Witch. She's been chopped up long ago by a hotel chef. It's the new Grand High Witch we've got to deal with now. The one in the castle, and all her assistants. A Grand High Witch, that would be the end of the world. I got it, I shouted, leaping above a foot in the air. I got the answer. Tell me, my grandma snapped. The answer is cats. Bring on the cats, my grandma said, staring at me. Then a great grin spread over her face, and she shouted, it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Shove a half dozen cats into the castle, I cried. Then they'll kill every mouse in the place in 5 minutes. I don't care how clever they are. You're a magician, my grandmother shouted, starting to wave her stick around once again. Look for the vases, Grandmama. To heck with the Look out for the vases, Grandmama. To heck with the vases, she shouted. I'm so thrilled I don't care if I break it the lot. Just one thing, I said. You've got to make absolutely sure I'm well out of my way before you put the cats in. That's a promise, she said. What will we do after the cats have been killed all the mice, I asked her. I'll take all the cats back to the village, and then you and I will have the castle completely to ourselves. Then we shall go through the records and get the names and the addresses of all the witches in the whole wide world. And after that, I said, quivering with excitement, after that, my darling, the greatest task of all will begin for you and me. We shall pack our bags and travel all over the world. In every country we visit, we shall seek the houses where the witches are living. We shall find each house, and one by one, having found it, you will creep inside and leave your little drops of deadly mouse maker in the bread, or the cornflakes, or the rice pudding, or whatever food you see lying about. It will be a triumph, my darling, a colossal, unbeatable triumph. We shall do it entirely by ourselves, just you and me, and that will be our work for the rest of our lives. My grandmother picked me off the table and kissed me on the nose. Oh, goodness me, we're going to be busy the next few weeks and months and years. I think we are, I said. Oh, what fun and excitement it's going to be. You can say that again, my grandma cried, giving me another kiss. I can't wait to get started.